Welcome back to Rewind of the Living Dead. I'm Damon Martin.
And I'm Chief Science Officer Patrick Guerra. Welcome to Alien Romulus.
Look at this shit, Damon. For the YouTubers, you could see this right there, face hugger.
Yeah, big time. And this should be no surprise that this is Patrick's Christmas, New Year's, and birthday wrapped up into 1 week, a new Alien film. Can I also say real quick, just a little inside baseball knowledge? I always play the intro, and I know on YouTube you don't get to hear it. The rest of the world hears the intro when we play it. I always try to play a trailer before I get into my my little preamble and we get to the music. I always search for what I call a TV spot, which is little 30-second clips, because you play a trailer, it can be like 4 minutes long. It's too much. Today, or when I was making the clips for the show, I was digging, trying to find a cool TV spot, and the one I found said it was from Africa, of all places. And that's the one I found because at the end, which I loved, in America, when they say tickets on sale now, the movie in theaters August 16th or August, whatever date it opened, that one I loved because the African one said in cinemas. And I was like, little difference, but I was like, I like cinema better than theater. So sorry, little inside baseball. I was very excited when I heard that when it's like in cinemas this August. I was like, yes.
I also love, it's like, it is the classic like trailer voice guy. And when he says like, they were looking for a new life, it found them. And I'm like, oh shit, that's fucking cool. Where like, I hadn't seen it anywhere. That's the first time I'd heard that. And it makes sense because that's a South African trailer. I wouldn't have seen it. But that's super rad. And yes, Damon, tonight we conclude this year. I mean, we still will have a wrap-up show, obviously, where we'll talk about all of the films, but we are talking about the final film, at least for now, in the Alien franchise. Alien Romulus opened August of 2024 with a budget of $80 million and a first weekend gross of $108 million, starring Kaylee Spaney as Rain, David Johnson as Andy, Archie Renault as Tyler, Isabella Merced as Kay, Spike Fern as Bjorn, and Aileen Wu as Navarro. As you mentioned, Damon, co-written by Rodo Sayajuez and Fede Alvarez, based off characters by Dan O'Bannon and Ronald Shusett, and directed, of course, by horror. I think horror stalwart and maybe perhaps horror favorite Fede Alvarez. Here we are with Alien Romulus, Damon. Oh my God, it's finally here.
The day has finally arrived. So we are going to keep our non-spoiler section rather short because so much of this movie requires spoilers, and also much like a couple of the movies we've talked about in the past, it's better to go in cold. But I think a little bit of detail that we can talk about in terms of the story doesn't really ruin anything. And I think a lot of our audience will appreciate that, because when we've done our Alien reviews, they've been some of our most popular episodes of our podcast. And for the hardcore audience of Alien fans out there, I think the general consensus, and again, I understand it's not everybody, but I think the general consensus when these new films, and also there's a TV show coming out by Noah Hawley on FX, is that give us Alien, give us Xenomorphs, give us a cool story. Just don't mess with the mythology. That's been my biggest concern this entire time. Is like, I didn't want to. I joked on the podcast with Alien Covenant. I was like, I don't want to see Sergeant A. Pone pop up at the end going, "Hey, sweethearts, we're going to LB-426." I was like, come
assholes and elbows.
Yeah, let's not rewrite history. Is all I'm saying. Like, I don't need. I love Michael Biehn. I do not need Hicks to somehow pop up in this movie, and he's just like, I'm dealing with aliens for a second time. Let's just not go there. So that was my biggest. So I will say, the way in to this universe through Alien Romulus, which we'll talk about in spoilers, was genius. It was a great connective tissue between, and this has been well documented. I said it in my intro, but I'll say it again now, and this is out there. This film takes place between the events of Alien and Aliens, and that's a 57-year gap. Remember, when they rescued Ripley in Aliens, they said you've been out here for 57 years. So that's a long time. So this takes place somewhere in that 57-year span. It's actually 20 years after Alien. Just, again, that doesn't tell you anything. And while there is a connective tissue and a pretty cool way in, I'll be honest, this doesn't mess with any of the mythology. You don't see Ripley show up. Ripley doesn't come in to save the day. Hicks isn't in there. Yeah. Somehow some of the characters from Alien don't just pop back up for some unknown reason that like you've never, somehow they survived or something like that. No, none of that. So in that way, they did right out of the gate. They won because they didn't mess with the mythology, which was my biggest fear. And again, I don't love all the Alien films. I adore Alien and Aliens. Like that's like the Bible and the Bible Part 2, or whatever you like, whatever
Old
you
and New
like,
Testament. Yeah,
it is the holy text. Do not mess with that. And that was my biggest fear. Is like, oh God, is because. You and I both know, Patrick, a lot of times that's how you hook audiences in, is you're like, oh, we're going to bring back Ripley, or we're going to bring back Hicks, or we're going to bring back whatever. The fact that they're not doing that, yet there is enough connective tissue to where you can see where these two worlds are together, that's all I wanted, and this film gave it to me.
Damon, the night before, I decided I had an early enough night where I had time to myself, which doesn't happen very often. I sat down and turned on Alien because I knew that Romulus was going to happen right after it. Boy, what a film. First of all, Alien, we've talked about it. Go check out that episode. What an incredible film. I wrap up with that. I start getting ready for bed, and this pit starts to develop in my stomach because tomorrow I'm going to go see a brand new movie in the Alien universe. I got genuinely nervous. Fede Alvarez decided to walk an incredibly tight line between Alien and Aliens, two of not just easily the best Alien films in the franchise, two of the best films ever made. I don't know where they are in those rankings. For me personally, Alien is my favorite #1 film of all time, and Aliens is not far behind it. It's a genuinely great film. He decided to walk this tightrope between these two movies. And I thought to myself all of a sudden, I was like, shit, he could really fuck this up. Because these movies are so good. Like, and you and I agreed ahead of time, it's like, we're not even going to try to compare Romulus to Alien and Aliens. These are incomparable films. And anyone with any salt who loves movies wouldn't dare put it up against those movies. And so I got like super nervous. And for the weeks like leading up to Romulus, about 2 weeks ahead of Romulus, I started to like mentally try to change to like really lower my expectations for this movie, to the point where I was like, fuck that movie, fuck Romulus. Like I was like, I have to like temper myself, because expectations can be the death. Like we've talked about this before. And so but the nervousness was still there. I was like, oh no, we're about to not just, I would love it if we got back into the Alien franchise and I knew it had nothing to do anywhere near those movies, but it's literally the gap between them. And I'm happy to report that indeed Fede Alvarez succeeded in bridging that gap. And he does it in his own very specific way. Even to the point where when I was experiencing the film, I was like, this doesn't even feel like a Ridley Scott or a James Cameron send-up in terms of like stylistic choices or anything like that. Like Fede's camera language was in this movie. It wasn't Ridley Scott's language. It wasn't like, and believe me, I have studied, like holy text, just as you said, I've studied the visual language of both Alien and Aliens, like the Torah, like the Bible, like the Quran, you know what I mean? Like these are super important movies to me, and I study how they were, and I was like, this looks nothing like those movies, but it lives in its DNA lives like in, and I was like so impressed by that. So, you know, that's not to say there aren't faults with this movie. We're going to get into that stuff, but I was incredibly relieved that this movie belongs. And I think that when you texted me, you saw it, I think just 1 hour behind me. And then you immediately text me afterwards because we're giant geeks. And you go, so? And I think the first thing I texted back to you was, it belongs. I think that was the only 2 words I gave you. I was like, I can't believe it. Like it belongs in this universe. Because let's be honest, our worst nightmare, Damon, is something that looks like Alien versus Predator or Alien Resurrection. That's the nightmare scenario. We're nowhere near there. We're galaxies away. You would need cryo chambers that can't sustain human life to get that far off of the pattern. Fede Alvarez and company, they made an alien movie, a proper alien movie.
Now, I will say, upon first viewing, when I left the theater, I texted you back and I said I liked 90% of it. And there were a couple things that I really bumped up against. Unfortunately, I can't get too detailed with that because of spoilers, because the two issues I have are very spoiler related. That being said, I waited a couple days. So I saw this Thursday night on opening night, and then we both agreed, let's not record the podcast right away. Let's take a couple days to ruminate with it, and let's try to go see it a second time. Because I did find a lot of value in doing that for both Longlegs and Maxine, films we reviewed this year, where I just happened to have time, and they were films that my girlfriend wanted to see. So I was like, well, I want to see them on opening night just to see them, but then she wanted to see them also, so I said, I'll go back and see them again. And I did. And I think both times really did add a little extra perspective in terms of how I felt about those movies. When I left Alien Romulus, I said I really liked 90% of it, but there was 10% that really bugged me, and I didn't enjoy it. And particularly, and this isn't a spoiler as to what it was, I said particularly it had to do with the ending. And I said that just didn't sit well with me. Again, I know, I'm sorry I can't get into particulars. I will in a few moments when we get to spoilers. But I wanted to see it a second time. And you sat and saw it a second time, and I actually saw it a second time today. And I sat down in a packed theater, and I mean packed theater, and I watched it, and I will say, just to be clear, I still bump up against the ending. The ending still bugs me, and we'll talk about that later in the podcast, why it bugs me. But the ending really did bug me. I still don't like it. Or let me phrase that. One element of the ending. The actual ending itself doesn't. I don't hate the way the film ended. Right. It didn't end. Again, this is not a spoiler because it didn't happen. And just to be clear, like it's not the end is like a door opens and Ripley's there, like, hey, what's going on, guys? That's not what I'm talking about. So no, just to be clear, the actual ending, how it ended, didn't bother me. It was just an element of the ending that bothered me. But seeing it for a second time today with another massive audience, and my theater on Thursday was packed and my theater today was packed, I walked away with a little bit of a different sense of how much I enjoyed this film. There are still elements I don't like, and I can say this, and this isn't a spoiler, because it doesn't tell you what's in it. I wasn't totally surprised that Fede Alvarez packed in fan service into this film. I think that's kind of, you use the word DNA. It's kind of ingrained in the DNA to do that a little bit. And I feel like Alien fans would almost be disappointed if he didn't pack in a little fan service in here. I understand, especially considering we haven't had a proper Alien film since Alien Resurrection. That's the last actual, just Alien film.
You just said proper Alien film, Alien Resurrection in a sentence, and I didn't pass out.
Yeah, but you know what I mean? Like, that's the last, where it was just focused on the aliens. Like, it wasn't Alien vs. Predator, and it wasn't a prequel. So, yeah, so it's been a long time. So I understood it was going to happen. There's still some things I bump up against in terms of, you and I have had this conversation how dangerous fan service can be. Because when you play to it too much, it's what is the line from Chef, the Jon Favreau film where Dustin Hoffman's character says, if you went and saw the Rolling Stones, they didn't play Satisfaction, you'd be pretty upset, right? You want to see them play their hits. I get it. I go to a lot of concerts. You definitely want to see them play their hits. I understand that. But there's also an element of that where it's like you don't necessarily just want to see a greatest hits concert every single time. Right. And so I feel like there was a little bit of a greatest hits feel to some of this movie, and I understand Fede Alvarez has said very publicly he wanted to pay homage to all of the Alien films in some way, shape, or form, and I can say he did that. Some better, some worse. Not the films. Right. I'm saying his homages were some better, some worse. That still bugged me, but the second viewing really did change my perspective to where I walked out of the theater and I said, okay, yes, fan service stuff still was a little ridiculous at times, and the one part of the ending that I really don't like, and I still don't like. But the rest of the film, I was just soaking it all in. And also because I wasn't there as a first-time viewer, I was kind of listening around me to
Right.
people's reactions. And that got me more in tune to like, ooh, people dig that, or people really like that part. And I'm not talking about the fan service parts. I'm just talking about parts of the movie, the thrilling parts, the scary parts, the big reveals. They were reacting, and I was like, they're getting it. They're enjoying this. This is okay. So the other day, you could read our text exchange. I was almost like angry. I was like, why did they do this? Today, I walked out and said, man, I'm glad they did this, with the exception of those two things. Fan service, a little bit too much, a little bit over the top in points, and the one part of the ending, which, again, I'll get to it. So, yeah, I would say I went from like 90%. I would say I'm up to like 95% now. There's a little bit. I can't say that I didn't change my opinion totally. But I would say my biggest takeaway from this film, from Alien Romulus, is that, much like you said, it belongs.
It belongs. It really does. And the fan service thing, and I've talked about it before, it's like you got to be real careful with how you do fan service. Because what you don't want to do, this is the most critical thing with fan service of anything, you don't want to sacrifice story. If you sacrifice story for fan service, you have screwed the pooch. That is where you've screwed up. I'm happy to report, at least as far as I'm concerned, that Alien Romulus does not screw its story to give you fan service, which is, I think, what you were basically saying at the end of our Covenant podcast. You were saying, don't fuck with the timeline. Because it would be great. You think I don't want to see Apone again? Apone's my favorite sergeant of all time. I would love to see Apone again. Rest in peace. I would love to see him again. But it would fuck with things. Do I want to see Hicks again? Yes, it would fuck with things. They don't fuck with things. They give you stuff, and it's always a dangerous line. And I say this to you off the air all the time. Fans are shitty. Let's just be honest. Fandom has turned into something ugly and gross. And like now there's no satiating them. There is no satisfying the fans. You give them what they want, they hate it. You don't give them what they want, they hate that too. You cannot win for losing as a filmmaker in fan service. I am very impressed with what Fede Alvarez did with his fan service, even though there are, and we'll get to moments where you and I were both like, oh, come on. And it's, but importantly, it didn't fuck with the story. So even the worst of my fan service criticism does not fuck with the story. That to me raises Fede Alvarez up another level. We already had a lot of respect for this guy. We like his other movies. For him to do that and to walk that line, you go, wow, Fede can play in a lot of worlds now. Fede could play in the DC universe. Fede could play in the Star Wars universe because he really knows how to balance it. I got some notes. We'll get to those in a second. They're not big notes. Like you said, you went from 90% to 95. That's an A+. If we're grading papers, we don't. But I got to tell you, Damon, look, I realized with all those nerves and stuff the night before that Alien is actually more important to me as a franchise than even Friday the 13th. I have more Alien stuff. There's an Alien painting right behind me. I have more Alien things. I have more Ripley things than I do Jason things. This is a franchise that I hold in super high regard. And Alien is my favorite film of all time. And it's utter perfection as a film goes. I'll show it to anybody. It doesn't matter. It's beyond horror for me. This could have gone very wrong, and it didn't. And so, Damon, I don't know how much more I can contain myself. We have a new this new section. Do you want to usher us into this new section before we go to spoilers?
Before we get there, let me ask one question. We already talked about my part. When we did our Alien Covenant podcast, we said, what does Alien Romulus need to give us that we be satisfied? My take, which you can see on TikTok and Instagram if you want the little clip, was don't mess with the mythology. Don't, as I said, don't bring back Ripley. Don't bring in Hicks to save the day. Don't do that. And I'm happy to say they didn't do that. While it does have connective tissue, pretty freaking brilliantly, by the way, how they connected I can't wait to talk about it. I'm super excited to talk about it in spoilers. the way they connected these films was like awe-inspiring genius, like full-on genius. Because I was scared. I was mortified. Like, how are you going to connect these two worlds? And your thought, by the way, which we talked about in the past episodes of like, how, is this going to take place on LV 426? A lot of things that could have gone wrong, I'm happy to say did not. So that was my condition. Just don't fuck with the mythology. I didn't want to see that happen. Yours was make it horror. So Patrick, in that regard, which that's no spoiler, did Fede Alvarez deliver on the horror in Alien Romulus?
This is a horror movie. Fantastic. And you know where I think it starts? I think it starts with the young cast. And we're going to talk about them in a minute. The young cast is something that is actually a staple of horror. And Fede brought this up in an interview recently. He goes, most horror films, they revolve around young people. And Alien is one of the few franchises where it's people over 30. I know Ripley or Sigourney was 28, I believe, when they did the first movie, but she still played like an older person, and everybody around her was much older than her. Like everybody's in their 30s, late 30s, 40s, and 50s. And the same goes across the entirety of the franchise. You're dealing with older people. For the first time, you're dealing with a young cast. And their motivations, their reactions, the way they navigate the horror. It's a horror movie. That's what I think that was cool about it. The first time I watched it, I was soaking it all in, and I couldn't even like feel the horror. I didn't know what I was doing. There was so much like, stimulation going at me that I wasn't quite grabbing it, which I'm glad I saw it a second time. The second time, the horror is so evident. It is really this like young people running the gauntlet, running into the most terrifying creature in the entire galaxy. And it feels that way. And it feels very unique because it's young people and because of their motivations. And we're going to get into that. But yes, Damon, my big note was, let's get to the horror. They got to the horror. It's bloody. It's scary. It's tense. I'm thinking pucker factor 8 to 10, depending on, your persuasion. My wife, I took her for the second viewing. She jumped out of her seat multiple times. There's great scares in this movie. There's great tension in this movie. There's great thrills. There's even a lot of action, which, that I think that's an homage to Aliens, because Aliens is one of the greatest action films ever made. So there's action, there's tension, there's thrills, there's chills, there's gore, there's blood, there's guts, there's monsters, there's scares, and there's some surprises. And we're going to get to that in a very, very short amount of time here.
And I can't believe I'm going to use the word you didn't. What I loved, I think, most about this film was there was a foreboding sense of dread throughout this entire film, because especially weirdly on a second viewing, I picked up on it even more because I knew it was coming, and I was like, oh, this is gonna suck. I know it's gonna suck, and man, this is rough. And so weirdly, a second viewing, I kind of got the dread even more weirdly, even though I love it.
Yeah, it took me a second viewing.
Yeah, so yeah, soaked in dread, horror, all of that. And so let's be honest, the two things we most wanted at Alien Rom before seeing it, Fede Alvarez gave us. It was a horror film, and it didn't fuck with the mythology. So Fede, even though I'm going to talk about some of the things I bumped up against in our spoiler section, bravo, sir, because you made a proper Alien film. And my biggest, again, even the stuff that I bump up against, you didn't do the one thing I didn't want you to do, which was I didn't want you to mess with the mythology. You didn't, and you wanted a proper horror film. He gave us that. So in that regard, Fede succeeds.
He does.
So
he absolutely does.
So our last section here before we get into spoilers, our new segment is, does it have our money? And this is basically where we pose to you, the audience, is this movie worth your money? It's not cheap to go see a movie in the theater, especially if you got a family. So we kind of grade this on a scale. Like, is it worth your money? Is it not worth your money? Is it worth waiting until streaming? We don't really have like a particular grade necessarily, but we kind of give you a grade in a sense of the word. For our first episode doing that last week with Cuckoo, you said, maybe wait till streaming, and I said only get it if like streaming is already available and you're already paying for it. So it's a slightly different grade on that. So with Alien Romulus, Patrick, does it have your money?
It had my money twice already. It had my money before it came out, but now that I've seen it, it's probably going to get my money again before it leaves theaters. That's insane. I may see this movie 3 times, and it's, and again, not without issues, but it's something to behold. We're going to get to that in just a second. You comb over this movie. It is a rich, full, large movie. The scale of this movie is tremendous. It's a very big. It feels like one of the biggest Alien movies, and that includes Covenant, which to me is a massive movie. This is a very big movie. It deserves a big screen experience at least once. At least I'm a diehard. I'm a hardcore Alien fan. I know the ins and outs of this mythology and all of its canon. So yeah, I definitely am gonna go to the movie theaters. If you're casual and you want a good night at the movies, you should go see Alien Romulus. And then, when it comes to Hulu, because I'm sure that's where it's gonna land, see it there too.
Can you imagine when they first started to make this movie, it was just going to go straight to Hulu?
Couldn't believe that.
That was the plan. That was the original plan. But again, I heard Fede Alvarez talk about this in interviews. That was during the pandemic, and there were no theaters open, so they were just planning for the potential disaster that theaters weren't going to be there. And so they're like, we're going to send this straight to Hulu. Of course, they were still filming when they got the word that, yes, this is going to go into theaters.
Yeah,
so
he said it was pretty early in the process. He said, we were basically getting the first few shots off when they said, guess what, guys, you're going to the theaters. And
could you imagine, though? Yeah, could you imagine?
I'd be so pissed.
So let me give you a slight grade. Not to get in a big preamble here. I'll give you a slight grade and does it have my money. So yes, it has my money immediately because there's certain franchises that I'll go see in the theater. I mean, I'm just saying there's a franchise fan. Because I know there's some people who aren't Alien franchise fans. Alien is one of those kind of like Alien, Halloween. Well, obviously Nightmare on Elm Street is number 1 for me. Scream is number 2. Alien is somewhere in there, and Halloween is probably a little further down thanks to David Gordon Green. It went in the trash after Halloween Ends. But there are certain franchises that I'm going to, not only going to get my money, I'm going to rush to the theater, see it first viewing I can, opening night. So that Alien does qualify for that. But the other way I'll say, does it have my money? Here's how it really has my money. A, I went back and saw it a second time. B, I'll probably go back and see it a third time before theaters are done with it, probably in a week or two when there's less people, because both my theaters this weekend were packed. And while I do enjoy the theater experience with other people when they're not being rude or, whatever's going on, and neither of my crowds were, I do sometimes like to see a theater where it's just kind of like quiet and I just get to enjoy the movie. So it'll probably get my money a third time, and on top of that, when it drops on home release, I'll be buying the 4K. So it's going to get a whole lot of my money. So that's the best way I can answer this question. Not only is it getting my money, it's getting a whole lot of my money, and I think that's a little slightly different grade. So yes, it's worth your money, and it's worth a whole lot of my money.
Yeah, it's getting a lot of my money. I bought that damn popcorn bucket with the face hugger on it because I was like, I can't not have this. I mean, that's how this is going.
Yeah, so now it's time to get into spoilers, and this is the one, just to be fair, if you haven't seen Alien Romulus, we've already said go see it. It's definitely worth your money. Go see it in theaters, but if you haven't seen it, or if you just don't care, we are now going to get into spoilers. The best way I can say this is...
She fucking crazy.
What the hell are we supposed to use, man? Harsh language?
Yes, we are going to use some harsh language. We are going to get into some language here. That's not necessarily a bad thing, by the way. I just had to pay homage.
Yeah, I just like to cuss.
One of my favorite lines from Aliens. So what are we supposed to use, man? Harsh language?
We miss you, Snow.
Yeah. No, it's Frost. Come on, now Frost.
I mean, Frost. Excuse me, Frost. I'm frazzled today, Damon. I'm excited.
Yeah. So let's talk about the spoiler. Let's talk about the plot first off. Let's talk about the cold open. The cold open of this movie sets the stage. We are 20 years after the events of Alien. And we see a scavenger ship through the deep reaches of space. And it just kind of turns on because it found what it's been looking for this entire time. And we get a scan off in the distance in the cold, dark of space. And you see the word Nostromo. Not to be confused with some other podcasts who call it the Nostradamus. The Nostromo is the actual name of the ship. First off, okay, we're in Alien. That is the ship from Alien, for anyone who didn't know. Immediately, I was like, ooh, this is interesting. And we see this ship descend upon this big hunk of looks like metal, but just this big hunk of junk in the middle of space. It retrieves it, brings it back inside, and it starts lasering around it. And we're like, what is this what I think it is? And sure enough, the Weyland Yutani Corporation has been searching for 20 years to find the remnants of the xenomorph that Ripley blew out of the airlock before she escaped from the Nostromo and jettisoned herself out into deep space for the next 57 years. 20 years into that, they found the relic, the remnants of the Nostromo, and they found the hunk of ice and carbon that was the xenomorph that got punched out into the middle of space. That's all they've ever wanted. Weyland Yutani wanted the xenomorph. Now, I was terrified of how they were going to get into this universe. You actually said, I thought it was going to be these kids were on LV-426, the planet from Aliens, and it was just going to be the attack where we see them at the beginning where, we know in Aliens that at some point they lose contact with the colony and the aliens, the xenomorphs, have taken over. And your idea was these kids were going to try to escape the planet, and that's where the whole thing would take place. I'm here to tell you that's not the case. So, Patrick, you were wrong. No offense. You were wrong. But when I saw the Nostromo and I saw them retrieve the hunk of ice in the middle of space and realizing that was the xenomorph, not to get crude or lewd here, but I was aroused. I was so excited. I was like, what a brilliant way into this universe without messing with anything, because Ripley blows it out of the airlock a couple times, actually. The Queen also in Aliens gets blown out of the airlock. It's a popular way to kill these creatures, or thankfully, hopefully kill these creatures. We never saw it again. We never heard about it again. Just fucking brilliant way to get into this universe, because, of course, this just evil corporation, of course they want the xenomorph. Of course they want this. That was all they were after in the first place. They were ready to sacrifice the entire crew of the Nostromo, which is what we learned from Ash in the original one. They didn't give a fuck about, you're all expendable. They want this creature. They don't care about you. Of course they're going to go searching for this thing. And it's just floating out there in space. They find it. That's our way in. Holy shit, Patrick. That's our way in.
Holy fucking shit. When this and I loved the setup. You're just seeing the glint of dark space, and you see that what is basically just a black ship floating through, completely dead, and then the lights and the computers kick on, and it's very Alien. It's using the sounds, it's using the imagery of Alien to kind of kick on this scavenger ship, and then when its floodlight hits this wreckage that is just floating out in the middle of the blackness of space, and you see the light shine over the Nostromo, and you're like, oh my god, of course. When Ripley blew this thing, out of the airlock and completely destroyed the Nostromo, those things don't just they don't just erase. Once the explosion happens, the deep freeze of space basically locks everything in a form of stasis. So all these little pieces of the ship that are just floating around in space, freezing, little elements claw onto it and stuff, little gobs of carbon and things. And when that asteroid-looking motherfucker gets swallowed up by this scavenger, and then they go back and there's like all these clear Weyland Yutani guys, which I think that was a nod to Alien 3. Their outfits, they're kind of hazmat outfits, and they're standing around what looks almost like, it almost felt like demonic. This demonic block that they're laser cutting open, and they open it up and you can see little patterns and things in it, and you're like, what? Oh my god, this is what they're doing. And then you see the perfect form of the xenomorph, whatever was left of it after Ripley hit it with that harpoon gun, and you go, this is what they were up to. Weyland Yutani don't fuck around. They're gonna get theirs at the end of the day. They wanted this thing, and it took them 20 years, but they found it. And what horrors are going to come from that? And that was the incredible thing. So what happens now, Damon, is then we cut to these kids running around, and I say kids, they're maybe early 20s. Rain, her brother Andy, They're running around this place called the Jackson Mine. From the trailers, it looked to me like LV-426. But truth be told, Weyland-Yutani's got hands in all reaches of the galaxy. And this is essentially a junk planet where they just have people mine stuff. And that's it. There's mining and farming. Those are the two things you can do. And Rain and her brother Andy, they believe that they've done enough work that they can finally get off planet. This is a cold, shitty, nasty planet. Life on this planet looks pretty rough. People are sick constantly. People are impoverished. People are dying because my grandfather was a coal miner. He died of complications from coal mining. It's a terrible business. So they want out. And what does the Weyland-Yutani Corporation say? You know what? We still need you here. So even though you've met your quota, come see us in 5 or 6 years and maybe we'll let you off planet. Well, that ain't going to fly, Damon. And she just happens to get a call from her ex-boyfriend. He says, "Hey, would you come around?" And he finds that way up above their planet, there is a derelict Weyland-Yutani ship. Okay, what does that matter to me? Rain thinks. He goes, "Well, you want to get off planet? So do we. We have no chance to get off this planet, but on that ship are some cryo chambers. We go steal those. It'll take us half an hour. We'll load them onto our ship, and we'll junk 9 years to a planet they're calling
Yavaga.
Yavaga, yes. It'll take us 9 years, but we'll have these cryopods. We can sleep in them, and we'll get the fuck out of here. And it's a garbage planet. They're on the edge of space. Nobody gives a shit about this place.
No sunlight.
There's no sunlight. It's basically self-regulated. It might as well be Fury 101. It's just a junk place. And this is their opportunity. And they need her. They didn't call her by accident. Her brother Andy is a droid. And Andy, has the Weyland-Yutani fingerprints to open doors. So they know that if they get to this derelict ship, he can open the doors for them. And then Damon, if you could guess, things don't go well from there.
Yeah, they get to the ship, and Andy is able to get them on board. And Andy, by the way, was a junked synthetic person that Rain's father repaired and basically turned him into her brother as like a protector. His only directive is do what's best for Rain. And her dad died of complications due to sickness from the mining. And so now she's alone with just her brother, Andy. And Andy is actually a name. That's the model of his android. He's a mining and farming droid. The Andy, I can't remember the exact number, but the Andy 2508 or whatever. And she just calls him Andy, and he is an android, but he is a damaged android. Her father just fixed him up and made him basically her protector in a way, but he's damaged, so she in a way she's his protector as much as he is hers. But they get to the ship, and it is not actually a ship. It's a space station, just kind of lingering on the edge of their planet, tilted on its side, nearing the rings, which this is a planet with rings around it, which is, basically space, rock and just like Saturn, it's rock and ice and just floating around. And this derelict space station is up there, and the space station is called the Remus Romulus. It's two parts of the ancient names, Remus and Romulus, and it is a space station, not a ship. But of course, the kids don't care because they're like, all we need is the cryo chambers. We get those, we put those on board, and we're going to sleep our way to Yavaga. We'll be there in 9 years, and then it's sweet sunlight and beaches and no more Weyland-Yutani. Yavaga is outside the Weyland-Yutani system. They have no reach there. This is not their planet, so they can't fuck with them at that point. So they get there, and they get on board, and Andy's able to get them inside, and they find the cryo chambers. But right away, they run into a problem. The cryo chambers only have enough energy for 3.5 years. They need 9 to get to Yavaga. So they have to find cryofuel, which is a nice little callback to the original Alien, where they are trying to escape the Nostromo, and they had to go down and find the fuel for the cryo chambers, which is when shit really hits the fan for part of the cast down there, for part of the crew down there before Rita Ripley eventually gets away. So they have to find this cryofuel. So they go and they go to the bridge, and they see a half torn apart synthetic. There's a giant hole through the middle of the Space station, which is, of course, indication there's been a xenomorph there. Acid is burned to the station. Of course, kids don't know this at this point, but they're all like, I don't know what's going on here. I don't know what happened, but let's just get this cryofuel and get the fuck out of here. So they go in and they get the cryofuel and they get the chamber, but then the door closes and locks them in the cryo chamber. Why? Because this is where we find out that this space station is not only where that xenomorph from Alien was taken for experimentation, but in the time since that's happened, in what we find out to be 170 days, so basically 6 months, they've not only retrieved the xenomorph that was frozen in space, the one that Ripley kicked out of the Nostromo, but they've experimented on it, they've extracted DNA, and they've actually managed to create facehuggers. And the facehuggers are all frozen in this cryo chamber. The only problem is when they got on board, it was frozen in there, the oxygen was off, the gravity was all messed up, and so they fixed the gravity, they fixed the oxygen, and they turned up the heat. What happens when heat hits ice, Patrick? It melts. And guess what happens when the facehuggers melt? They come alive. And that's when mayhem really starts. That's when shit really hits the fan in this story.
It was so fascinating, this this reveal of this laboratory area when they get to the cryo chamber, or where they're going to get the cryo fuel. You know, they pull that fuel out and it fucks with the temperature in the room. That cryo fuel's keeping that room on ice. That room is lined not with eggs, like egg sacs. Weyland-Yutani has succeeded. They wanted to weaponize the xenomorph. They figured it out. There's no eggs in there. It's not an egg chamber. They basically vacuum seal and incubate their face huggers in kind of these arrays, and they're just shrink wrapped in them. So they've already figured out a way, because Weyland-Yutani, has clearly endless amounts of money in their weapons division, to now streamline it, and now it's just something that you can travel with. You don't even need egg sacs anymore. They've gone beyond needing a queen. They figured it out, right? They don't even know about a queen at this point. The aliens hasn't happened, but they figured it out. They've properly weaponized it. And these kids, by accident, because they're trying to get cryofuel to get the fuck out of there, turn the heat up and hatch a fucking shitload of facehuggers. I remember seeing the first teaser, and you see a swarm of facehuggers running after them. And I was like, how is that happening? Tell me how that happens. That's how it happens. They get into that room, they turn the heat up, and horror ensues. And man, oh man, from this point on, it's a proper Alien movie. Face huggers, chest bursting, alien births, heads smashing, blood dripping, screams, guns, and then new tricks, Damon. You know, we're going to get into some of the new tricks. I think it's really fun. But I was so very impressed with how much this became an Alien movie when the shit hits the fan in a totally new way. That's what got me. I was like, oh, okay, Weyland-Yutani managed to weaponize, and guess what? Shit went wrong for them right away. It took out this gigantic space station. These aliens ran amok very quickly because, you know, Weyland-Yutani is fucking with stuff that they can't comprehend. They just can't. And when you let a xenomorph in, you are fucked. You just are. We've established this. This franchise makes it very clear. Do not let a xenomorph in. It's worse than letting any possible other thing in. These things just know how to keep on going. And I mean, these kids run the fucking gauntlet. They run the Alien gauntlet and they get their asses kicked, but it's so different because they're young kids. And I want to stick with this scene right now, and then maybe we'll just kind of gloss over the rest of everything else. But when one of the characters who's like in the trailer says, "Something in the fucking water," that's Bjorn. When he's getting attacked by facehuggers, because they're getting him from left and right, they're all trying to attack him, and he's swinging on them with his cattle prod, and he's hitting them, and he's like knocking them off the place. I go, this is the difference. When you have kids, they're young, they're agile, their reflexes are super sharp. They're just faster, better. They're the best versions of human beings. They're like 16 to 25-year-olds are the pinnacle of what a human can be. And so they're fucking fighting. They're fighting back for their lives. I mean, they are completely out of their depth. but just on instinct alone, on sheer survival instinct alone, like they're doing their best to hold their own. And I was like, holy shit, this is fucking rad. It's a whole different way of looking at it. Because remember the Space Marines, they came in cocky. They came in thinking, oh, this is another bug hunt. They got their asses handed to them. They really did. These kids just on reflex alone, on fear, on piss and vinegar, they fought for their lives. They largely fail because, again, don't let a xenomorph in, you don't win. But it was a whole new dynamic, and I really, really enjoyed that.
Also, another thing I want to mention about that cold open that we find out later on, which we're going to discover there is a science officer who is actually a synthetic person on board, and we'll talk more about that in a moment. But the synthetic person on board that they're able to reactivate tells them that, yes, we found the xenomorph that was ejected from the Nostromo and we were experimenting on it. What we didn't expect was it was still fucking alive. These are the perfect killing machines. They do not eat, they do not sleep, they do not need oxygen. So when they unfroze the xenomorph that Ripley kicked out of the ship and blew out of the airlock, it didn't die. It was still alive in like a stasis. That's fucking wild.
And
that
it still had the harpoon. It still had the harpoon sticking through its body.
Yeah, this is a survivor creature, and it is the ultimate killing machine. It is not made to just hang out and chill, and it's not seeking food, it's not seeking shelter. It's seeking to reproduce and kill as much as it possibly can. That's all these creatures are about. It's one step removed. It's two steps removed from the great white shark in Jaws. When Hooper has that great line when he says, all this shark does is eat and swim and make little sharks. And that's it. The xenomorph doesn't eat, doesn't swim, all it wants to do is make other aliens and kill you. And it doesn't need anything else. Doesn't need oxygen. Doesn't need warmth. It just needs to not be frozen, but it doesn't need anything. It's just going to kill you. And I love that wrinkle because that just injects a whole other element of fear. Because both Alien and Aliens, the way they stop the final alien is to blow it out of the airlock. Well, guess what? Now we find out that doesn't even fucking stop them technically. Like, as long as you don't ever find them, sure. But if you find them or they fall on a planet, so they get caught in the gravitational pull and get pulled down the planet, you're still fucked. Because they don't really die unless you full on blow them away like the Marines do in Aliens, where you just, riddle them with bullets. That's it. So I love that little wrinkle, and yeah, once the mayhem starts, also one thing I really loved about this film, which was two things they did in this film that were slightly different than all the other Alien films, but you still using when I say mythology, still using the biology of what we know about these creatures. One, the facehuggers really became a big part of the creature part of this film. Like, yes, we do get xenomorphs. There's plenty of them later in the film. But the facehuggers become a big part of the plot. Like, it's not just the two facehuggers and aliens that they dump in a room with Newt and Ripley to try to get them to get infected or get them impregnated so they can put them in stasis and bring them back home to experiment on them. These are it's a full-on array of facehuggers.
It's an infestation.
And it's not one egg opening up and then attaching itself to ash like it was an Alien. This is, as you said, it's like the movie Infested. It's just spiders everywhere. It's just facehuggers, and they become as scary a part of this story as the actual xenomorph, which is different. We've not really seen that before. So that was really interesting, and I really enjoyed that part of it. And so that was terrifying. And then, of course, once they really get going and the xenomorphs, are fully realized, then the shit really does hit the fan. And unlike Aliens, which the Marines, as you said, were super cocky, and they didn't believe Ripley when she's like, one of these things killed my entire crew in one day. And if these colonists have found this ship, I don't know how many of them there are out there. And the Marines are like, sure, whatever. And it's not until they get to the planet and they face them and Ripley becomes their encyclopedia of xenomorphs. This is going back to Alien, where they just don't know what they're dealing with. They have no idea what they're dealing with. And so that's kind of what these kids are dealing with. They don't know that the facehuggers are trying to impregnate them. They find out in a pretty fucking brutal way. They don't know that these things turn into xenomorphs. They don't know right away that the blood is acid. They figure that out, and that's the other element of this film that I really liked is the acid for blood. While it has always been a part of the Alien franchise, from that first facehugger they cut open and it drips all the way through the ship, to of course all the crazy acid baths that people take in Aliens. It really becomes a major part of this film. The acid from the blood becomes a huge part of this film, and I like the way they use that. They weaponize it in such a different way, to a point where your boy, what was his name, Bjorn, your boy Bjorn tries to kill a xenomorph. It backfires spectacularly, and it ends up dripping acid, and it literally melts his hand off, which was totally new. And I was like, that's fucking rad. You just melted this dude's hand off. That's pretty rad. And it just keeps dripping on him. So his entire body basically gets killed by acid dropping on him, which was different. So, yeah, it's a lot of elements that you know, but they use in different ways.
We don't have a best death category today, but Bjorn's death is particularly interesting. There's two like really highlighted deaths, and Bjorn's one of them. When that, I love that he puts his hand up to block the acid, and the acid melts his hand away. You know, Fede Alvarez is known for his hardcore gore, obviously from his Evil Dead remake. So it's all melting away, and then it drips onto his chest, and it starts to burn through his chest. I loved this little detail, and it was very subtle. They could have gone really crazy. They could have gone really over the top. But basically, the acid hits his heart as it's pumping, and his heart just explodes. No, it's not super graphic, but you just see the pop of like, my heart was beating, you know, obviously his heart was probably beating 200 beats a minute at that point. And because he's being chewed alive by this incredible acid. But when it hits his heart, as his heart is beating, it just pops. And I was like, damn, there's something so... The two deaths, and maybe you want to talk about them right now. I don't know if you wanted. The two big deaths is Bjorn's and Navarro's. Navarro, you see a lot of what happens to Navarro in the trailers. She's almost very, very much spoiled. Navarro gets a big face hugger on the face, and they don't know what they're doing with it, and it turns into a great scene with Andy, which I know we'll get into in a little bit. But you see in the in the trailer that she puts an X-ray machine on her body, and you can see that there is a chest burster inside of her ready to get out. And indeed, you hear that little growl. It's the same growl from Alien, from the original, when it pops out of Kane's chest and it goes like that. Like you can hear it muffled under her chest plate, and then it breaks out. It doesn't do the dramatic explosion, the fast like that has happened in pretty much every Alien movie. When you show a chest burster, it's quick. Fede said, "Let's slow this motherfucker down." It pops, and then it cracks the chest plate, and this new xenomorph is slowly inching its way out of her chest in an agonizing scene. It's so different. Like it was really it was the other way. I was like, Fede's finding different ways to show you the classics, right? Like you go to a concert and they're playing the hits, and they play it in a way that you didn't. They're playing it acoustically this time. Basically, he's playing the chest burster in an acoustic fashion, where it's slow and painstaking, and you see it breaking through its amniotic sac and slowly kind of just trying to wriggle its way out of her chest plate, and her chest plate's like resisting against it, and it comes out and it slithers away, and you know, the maw of the wound is sitting there bloody and slow and nasty. And I was just like, hell fucking yeah, when this movie wants to go raw, it goes fucking raw.
Did you get the sense, so just to throw this out there, because I think this is how I explained it, because once again, there's no general idea how long these things gestate. We still don't know that answer, because Navarro had the thing on her. So what happens is the facehugger attacks Navarro, and they're like, we need to get it off her. And Rain's the one who figures out it's choking her. It's got its tail wrapped around her neck. And then Randy's like, it's feeding her oxygen. So if you pull it off, it will kill her, just like we know will happen to all these facehuggers. And they said, what if we freeze the tail? They have their canisters of the cryofuel. What if we freeze the tail? Would it potentially release itself from her and we could pull it off? And they're like, well, that in theory it would work. And so What's his name? Is it Tyler? Is that his name? Am I forgetting his name? Why am I forgetting his name?
Yeah, Tyler.
Tyler grabs the cryofuel, plugs in the gun, and he freezes the tail. And sure enough, it unravels. And so they grab the facehugger, and you see how deep down that tube has gone into Navarro's throat to implant the egg. They pull it out, they chuck it, and it's still alive. And they freeze it again. It runs and scurries off down into the acid hole. And then they're like, was she impregnated? Because it didn't stay on its entire gestation period. And they say, well, 60-40 chance. Your friend's got a 60-40 chance that it did or didn't. 60 in the bad way. Like 60% chance it laid its egg and you're still fucked. It did. It laid its egg and Navarro was still fucked. But my guess watching the movie, the reason why it was slow to come out and not bursting through is because it was underdeveloped. It was almost like a preemie. It was almost like
that's a good way of looking at it.
A premature baby, so it didn't have its full gestation period because when the facehugger goes on your face, at least in, let's say, the Ash version where it was on his face where we assume 24 hours when it comes on the ship and overnight. I mean, it's on his face overnight before it finally falls off. That's the gestation period where it lays the egg or it lays the embryo and the embryo has time to develop. And so then by the time it falls off and dies, and we have to imagine it's another, 10 hours, 8 hours between then and when Ash is eating dinner with the crew, and then that's when it bursts out. They're getting ready to go back in their cryo sleep. It bursts out of his chest. It's had that full 30, let's just say 30 hours to develop. I don't know what the time, again, these timelines are all fucking weird, but let's just say 30 hours. I was assuming watching the movie this time, watching Romulus, that because the thing didn't have time to allow it to gestate properly, they pulled the facehugger off, it wasn't fully developed. So it still burst out of its chest, but it's almost like a premature baby was the way I took it.
That's a really interesting way to take that, and I bet that's how they rationalized it. But that's the attention to detail you're dealing with in this movie. It's like everything is thought of. And that's the big one where I'm just like, don't put something in front of me and not make it make sense down the line. I was just kind of enjoying the sadism of it, but you saw the logic in it. And it does make sense. I mean, they ripped it off her within moments of it attaching to her. I mean, I think they had about 2 or 3 minutes to think about it while they figured out a way to get it off of her. And then, she runs and she's pumping blood through it and all of that stuff. And she's feeding it as it's growing. And once she tries to get back to the ship with Kay, when she gets back to the ship, and her Kay and Bjorn are back on their ship and they're planning to get the fuck out of there because they've had a hard day and they're done. She has gestated it enough that it will find its way to just fucking go. And I love that attention to detail because I think that actually informs after it bursts and escapes away, it goes and makes a cocoon for itself, a rather big cocoon, something that we have never seen before. At least it to my knowledge. Correct me if you've seen it before.
No, I've not seen it before.
We see this xenomorph make a cocoon for itself to grow into the alien that you would have seen like in the original Alien. And it's this very large, very vaginal, very H.R. Giger inspired cocoon. And I'm wondering if it rushed away and kind of cocooned itself to gain some strength, to get some time to grow. It needed to kind of protect itself to grow and get bigger. Obviously it burrowed its way right out of Navarro and killed her. And so they go on the hunt to get everybody back and they run into that cocoon. And this is another little detail I love. So Bjorn is, we're going to get into Bjorn at some point. We should probably just take a moment to talk about the kids, but Bjorn is a bit of a hothead and he's got this cattle prod and he sees that cocoon and he's like, we ain't leaving without fucking that thing up. Because fuck that thing. It killed my friend. And he's very close with Navarro. That was established very easily. They do that great in this movie. He sticks that cattle prod inside that cocoon and he just goes to town. He tries to fuck this thing up and kill it. And he thinks he does. And some acid comes out. We mentioned the acid blood. And he gets jammed up the eye with that scorpion tail that they always have. Well, he didn't not do damage while he was sticking that cattle prod in there. It created this weird crack in the alien's head. And then from that point on, the alien absorbed that electricity. And anytime that alien was moving around, you could see it just flashing a little bit in that wound. that was your way to discern it from what eventually will become a swarm of full-blown xenomorphs, full-grown xenomorphs. You're going to get that later on. That's so fucking rad that they did it. It goes from an alien movie to an aliens movie, but you can tell which one is actually after them, has designs on them because it has that electronic bolt moving through the front of its head. And I love this design. And I believe it was a nod to, I think I actually have a doll somewhere around there that actually looks like this. So I think it's a reference to like either a video game or a comic book one that I believe is called Moonscreen. And it's got this new alien design, very translucent, very reminiscent of the first one, kind of a lighter gray color. And it has that long, sleek head. It doesn't have the more ornate head of the aliens, because those are further developed aliens, as we established in the movie Aliens. This one is still a young, like kind of a young, maybe teenager aged one. They're slicker and sleeker, and it felt very classic. And it was really fun to see that alien design with the new twist of that electric bolt going through its face. And that didn't feel cheesy to me.
It didn't, and I never announced it necessarily, but obviously we're kind of talking about what we always call our face huggable section, the things we loved about this movie. We've been raving on that for a few minutes. Real quick before we move on to our next section, I do want to mention, this is mostly a film done with practical effects, because I saw an interview with Fetty where he talked about doing the chest burster scene, which again was done differently than the other Alien movies, and they redid the Kane version where they had Navarro, the actor who played Navarro, which let me make sure and get their name, Eileen Wu. Eileen Wu. They had her basically on her head, and they had a fake body, which is exactly what they did with Kane in Alien. But then they also built a giant double. So they basically built a second version of the body, but it was, basically, like a 10-foot tall Eileen Wu with the body. And so they actually had a practical version because they wanted to get detailed with the xenomorph popping through. And you can't do that on a small, tiny version that's, 3 inches wide or whatever, 4 inches wide. So they built like a 10-foot giant Eileen Wu stand-in, and that's what you see burst through. And that's what's actually in the film. So you can see more detail on the first look at the xenomorph, because they built a giant version of it, and that's what actually pops through her chest, is the big version that they of course make it look normal on screen. But the majority of the effects in this movie are done through practical effects. Now of course there is some CGI, and we'll talk a couple moments that get pretty wonky with the CGI in this movie, but for the most part it was practical. I saw a video where they showed all the xenomorphs they built. It was mechanical, practical effects with xenomorphs. So I loved it because that was, and again, this is before CGI existed. Obviously, you look at what James Cameron's doing with Avatar, that's all CGI. I understand that. But when you go watch, and I think there was a series, what is it called? Movies That Made Us is the series on Netflix. They do a full episode on aliens, and you can see them building the aliens. And you can go back and listen to our aliens episode as well. We talk a lot about it there. But they had to really get, into ingenuity to build these fucking aliens, because there was no CGI at that point. They were just creating practical effects. And when you watch that movie from 1986 to now, it still holds up. It looks great. It looks brilliant. And that speaks to the ingenuity of James Cameron, and that's carried forward in what Fede Alvarez does in this film.
It's a huge face huggable moment for us. All these gorgeous practical effects. And I'm sure a lot of people have seen online now, if you're like us and you consume a lot of horror content online on like Instagram, TikTok, they built their first ever animatronic aliens. So we've always had guys in suits. We've used that many times. We've even used the optical effect, which was Alien 3, which didn't look great. This time around, they said, yeah, we're going to put guys in suits. We're going to do a 10-foot version of Aileen Wu, which makes this for a super rad moment. And talk about the magic of filmmaking to be able to do something like that and really sell it. It looks great on screen, looks seamless on screen. And then you level up with, now we'll make some animatronic aliens. And by the way, and we should mention this is the original team. These are the guys who started on Aliens. They've all broken off and they've all done other things. Fede Alvarez assembled all those guys back. They have different companies, but they got their start doing the
Stan
effects for
Winston.
aliens.
It was Stan Winston's crew. They've all broken apart and done other things, but it was some of the original people from that crew of Stan Winston's group that came back to do it Romulus.
And it shows. It really shows. This film has some of the best looking practical effects that I've seen in recent memory. And when you say, you know, we always mention, you know, there's going to be CG. Even for practical effects, they need CG to assist. They need CG to erase, you know, like the rods or like there's a huge jib arm coming off the back of a giant alien. They need to erase that. So CG comes in, they work in concert together. But the thing that's being filmed, the thing that the actor is acting against is really there in the room with them. And even the things that are even the most egregious in this movie are still practically in the room with assistance from CGI. And that is a perfect, beautiful blend of these two worlds. Because for a while, it seemed like everybody was just like, let's just do CGI. Like, let's just make a CGI version of it. People are coming back to the idea of doing practical. It's expensive. It makes for longer shoot days. It's more difficult, all that good stuff. But the fans respond to it. And in all genres, not just in the horror genre, but all genres. The fans like practical effects. This movie really gives them to you. Now,
And
one more yeah, go ahead.
Just say, and you know my opinion on CGI. Like, I understand when you watch a Marvel movie, you're going to get a lot of CGI. And when it's done well, it can still look good. I watch Avengers Endgame, and that moment when all the heroes come back to life, I cry and I get excited and I love it and it's all amazing. Then occasionally you get, you know, some movies where the CGI is not so great and you get, you know, things like that. So I'm a practical effects guy. I always prefer practical effects. Again, I understand there's a time and a place for CGI, but give me practical effects every time if you can. Again, I understand Marvel can't do that. I don't blame them. I understand it. But in this case, I'm really glad that Fede Alvarez chose to do practical.
And also another piece of the practical is the Jackson mining colony. That's almost all practical built. The huge sets they built out on a big lot. I loved seeing that world. Fede describes it as he goes, I wanted to take people to what it looks like to live in the third world. Fede Alvarez comes from Uruguay. He goes, I wanted to show people what the third world really is like. And the texture, it's very lived in. It feels so big. I mean, they probably built, you know, like I would say maybe 3 city blocks is probably about what they built. They practically built out 3 city blocks. That's another thing that just looked amazing. And you really got the sense that life out in deep space, working for a huge corporation that does not give a fuck about you, it sucks. It's a really shitty world to live in. There was one other face huggable that I really wanted to talk about, and that is the cast. I saw, and this was mainly more with, like, I would say horror creators rather than like professional movie critics and stuff like that. I saw a lot of criticism that this was an unlikable and poorly developed cast. Damon, correct me if I'm wrong, but are those people out of their fucking mind?
Yeah, this to me, if I'm going to compliment the movie in terms of the cast, one of the biggest problems we had with Prometheus was the disconnect with the cast. It felt like we didn't care about any of them, and we said that very openly. That was one of the biggest problems with Prometheus.
And it was even worse in Covenant. Yeah.
Yeah. But we said with Alien, even though we never really know much about these people, we know right away that they've worked together. They've worked together for years. They've been a crew for a while, and they know each other very well. Aliens, same kind of thing. Ripley's the outsider, but then you realize this colonial marine group, they've been together for a while, just like when they wake up from their cryopods and Vasquez and why am I forgetting his name?
Oh God, I know. Yeah,
Drake.
Vasquez.
Drake.
Drake. Yeah,
they're doing the pull-ups and you know, of course, you know, Hudson is doing the whole, you know, has anyone ever mistaken you for a man? No. Have you? You know, just they have a rapport together. They talk about the missions they've done before, and you just know that, and so you get attached to that crew. Now, I would argue it's a little lesser done in Alien 3, but the characters that you do meet and kind of get attached to a little bit with, like, you know, Dr. Clemens and the there's a couple in there. It's not as well fleshed out, but it's a little bit there. And then, you know, Alien Resurrection is just a fucking mess, and fuck you, Josh Whedon. To get back to your point, I thought this was an incredibly well fleshed out cast, and I cared or didn't care about everybody. Rain, of course, the lead, Kaylee Spaney, was incredible. Tyler, you see that relationship that they shared, ex-boyfriend, girlfriend, still kind of cared for each other, but they're not together anymore. Bjorn, we didn't put it in the categories this week of our, Mike from Blair Witch Project, the guy you'd most like to punch. There's about 10 times where I wanted to fucking soccer kick Bjorn in the face in this movie. Navarro's kind of like the badass pilot, but then you see the real fear in her eyes when she gets attacked by the facehugger. Kay is the younger sister of Tyler, who we find out is pregnant early on in the movie. She's all excited to go live on Yavaga because she actually gets to start a new life with her child in a new world where they're not going to be just living as drones of the Weyland-Yutani Corporation. I'm sorry. Listen, everyone's entitled to their opinion. You're absolutely. I'm not even telling you should like this movie. I'm telling you why I like this movie. I thought the cast was incredibly fleshed out, so I have no idea what the fuck they're talking about.
Yeah, I was so confused, and it was a consistent thing for the people who dislike this movie. And there's plenty of people who are like, I hate Alien Romulus. And near the top of their list was this cast. They go, I didn't like them, and Fede Alvarez sucks at developing characters. And I was like, did you not watch the movie I watched? These are some of the best developed characters in the entire franchise. I don't believe I'm exaggerating. I believe, outside of Ripley, who is the best developed character of all of them, I think this is the best developed group of people ever in the franchise. We know why Rain wants to get off planet. It makes total sense. Her brother, we get just enough of his story to understand that he is this, broken down droid, and she takes care of him, even though you even learn those little things. Like you learn, yes, her dad retrieved him and got him to take care of her, probably because her dad knew he was going to die of the black lung. He's like, someone has to be the protector of my daughter. They never hammer this over the head. They never shove it in your face. It's done so subtly, which is the genius of Alien, is how subtle you understand these people. It's done here as well with Rain and Andy. The relationship between Rain and Tyler is never thrown in your face. They never even say boyfriend, girlfriend, but everybody knows it. It's on the face of every character. They give it to you. They show it to you. They don't say it to you. This is high level shit. This is high level. I worry that some of those creators are a little too busy watching like really shitty horror movies, and they think that's how character development is supposed to go. This is A+ character development. And even the one who I understand, who you and I would both love to just swing golf clubs at his face all day, Bjorn. Why is Bjorn such a dick? He's a dick to Andy, Andy's a total sweetheart. We're going to talk about him at length shortly. Bjorn's mother was killed when a droid had to make a choice between saving 12 lives and saving 3. He chose to sacrifice 3 to save 12. That's how an AI worked. And it was an AI that was probably looked exactly like Andy, because Andy's programmed to help people in mines and farms. And his mom was one of the 3 that was killed. Well, you and I know we come from rougher backgrounds, poorer backgrounds. A kid that their parent dies in a situation like that, and they're destitute and they're poor, it's not like he's going to therapy to get help for this. He's deeply damaged by it. And there's this old adage, hurt people hurt people. That's Bjorn. He looks over at Andy and goes, that's the same fucker that the same kind of fucker that chose to kill my mom. So fuck him. Fully developed, fully fleshed.
And Bjorn's feelings towards Andy, as much as he's an ass, because when you meet Andy, he's such a sweet, gentle guy, like such a sweet, gentle android. You're like, how could you be mean to Andy? It's really no different than Ripley's feelings towards Bishop in Aliens. She's like, would you like some cornbread? He's like, oh, Bishop, I thought you never missed. And she's like, what is an android doing on board? And she's like, you stay away from me, Bishop. You got that? Like, she's immediately, because of her experience with Ash. She has the same exact, and it's not until literally the end of the movie when he saves her that she's like, not bad, when he says not bad for a human. She finally learns to trust Bishop when he comes back and saves her and Newt from that platform. Does she finally come around to trust him? Not until then. All the other things Bishop did during the entire movie didn't mean shit to her. It's not until the very end when he saves them that she's like, good job. She hates them. And this is the same thing now. it's harder for us to reconcile that with Bjorn because he's such a dick and Andy is such a sweetheart. So it's hard for us to like, how are you mean to Andy? Andy's like this sweet, gentle creature. How are you being mean to him? But that's why. He has a reason. In our heads, it's harder to reconcile because Andy is such a sweet creature. But we didn't have that relationship with Ripley and Bishop in Aliens because Bishop was kind of a cold, calculating android, and we learned that very early on. And then when she meets him, she's like, fuck this guy. I don't want to be on the ship with this guy. Same thing.
And the difference between Ripley and Bjorn, Ripley's adjusted. Bjorn is maladjusted. Yeah. And that's something that's like, you have to come from a certain background to understand. I know people like that. It's like, you can't convince them that like, no, you're misplacing your anger here. Your anger is not at Andy, but Bjorn doesn't understand that. He's a kid. His emotions are super high. He's also getting high all the time. Like he's got chemical dependencies. My point is, these characters are incredibly fleshed out. And I hope some of those creators hear this and go, yeah, I guess I didn't see it that way. Because when I heard people saying this is a poorly developed cast that they don't give a fuck about, I go, then you just weren't paying attention. You were just being a bad moviegoer that time around. Sorry to break it to you. You just still doesn't mean I'm telling you have to like this movie. I'm telling you these are incredibly crafted characters, like they just are.
I don't want to get into ranking, but I would say in terms of all the Alien movies of the cast that I cared about and that were the most fleshed out, I would put Aliens number one for me personally, just because the group with the Colonial Marines, then of course eventually bringing in where Ripley becomes one of the gang. Paul Reiser's character is the corporate stooge. Yeah. Those relationships were the best in my opinion. Maybe this is sacrilege to say this, but I think Romulus is probably number two and Alien would be number three, because even as much as I love the cast of Alien and you realize these people have worked together and they've been together and they've served together, we still don't really know that much about them. We just know a couple of them are super motivated by money. There's Dallas, who's the leader. There's Ripley, who is, kind of like slightly the number two in command. We just know that they've been together. They get that lived in feeling, but we don't really know a lot about them. We care about them when they start dying because we kind of have this camaraderie with them, but we don't know. They actually flesh out the characters in Alien Romulus a little bit better than that, in my opinion. So I put Aliens number one, Alien Romulus number two in that regard, in terms of building out the characters.
And there's even arguments to throw Romulus ahead of Aliens in this aspect, just in the terms of how you develop these characters and all that stuff. I just wanted to make a very strong point that people who are saying these are poorly developed characters, you shouldn't listen to those people. Their opinion is wrong. It's just flat out wrong because of the mechanics of how you actually develop characters. This movie did a phenomenal job. Rank it where you want to rank it. Like it if you don't, all good, but this is an incredibly well-developed cast that you do root for if you're paying attention.
Yeah. Now, with that being said, Patrick, we're talking a lot about our pros, our face-huggable moments. Our next category we're going to call Killing Newton Hicks. If you go back and listen to our Alien 3 episode, you can hear me just full-on rage that my least favorite part of Alien 3 is that they just killed Newton Hicks in such an unsatisfactory way after it was almost like sacrilege to me of going through everything you go through in Aliens and then they just die off screen. Now, I understand. I'm not going to rehash that. We talked about it in that podcast. You liked it, and I just said it just felt so unsatisfactory because of what happened in Aliens. It just pissed me off. That's the one element of that movie that pissed me off beyond anything else. It's just like, kill him, fine, but don't just kill him off screen. So, for Alien Romulus, Patrick, there were parts that we didn't like, things that we bumped up against, and I think we got to start off and talk about the elephant in the room, which is the cast member from the past who came back to life in Alien Romulus.
Yes, Damon. You mentioned earlier a cut in half android or artificial human who is on the Romulus and who is going to help these people, at least you think, help these people understand what they're dealing with, because he was actually there and dealt with everything. They managed to hook him back up, and when the lights shine on his face, he looks awfully familiar. But his name is Science Officer Rook. But damn it if he doesn't look identical to the most infamous of androids, Ash. It is Ian Holm redesigned and brought into this movie. This was a huge choice to make, and from what you have told me, this was Ridley Scott's suggestion. Bring Ian Holm back. They brought his character back. Now I knew when I saw him, and it's, mind you, it's just the upper torso with a bunch of droid guts and stuff spilling out of it. I knew right then and there when I saw him, when the light shone on him, and I felt it coming. But once they confirmed it, I said, "Oh my God, they brought back Ash." Now they didn't bring back Ash. This is Science Officer Rook, but like any other android, like Andy, like Bishop, there are multiples of them. They just look the same. I knew this was going to get shit for multiple reasons. The first of it is bringing back someone who is now passed on. Ian Holm passed away in 2020, I believe, right?
2021, I believe, is when he died.
Somewhere in there, right? And so Ian Holm has since passed, but they brought his likeness back in this animatronic form. It is an animatronic robot with some CGI assistance, as we explained earlier. I knew that was going to just rub people the wrong way because this person has died. This person has moved on. You have some insight as to why. Now, we're not done talking about the subject because there's more to talk about besides just the fact that we brought him back. But you brought some insight that I didn't know about, and I'd love you to tell people right now because I feel a way better about it now, knowing what I know. And so, Damon Martin, please give us some insight on why Ian Holm's likeness is back in this movie.
And just to be fair, this was one of the biggest things I bumped up against because I'm like, the guy died. Like, there's no reason to bring him back. Lance Henriksen is still out there. Michael Fassbender is still out there. I thought, man, bring back David. That would be kind of cool. Bring back Bishop. You can digitally de-age Lance Henriksen. Do that. Or my other suggestion was have it be another David, another Andy, even though we know Andy is supposed to be a mining and farming droid. Anything. I was just like, don't do this. It's sacrilege. The guy died. But here is the insight that I didn't know until I read an interview today with Fede Alvarez. He had talked about this, and he said that it was him and Ridley Scott who came up with the idea because they felt that Lance Henriksen had come back in Alien 3. He had come back in Alien vs. Predator. That Bishop character had popped up several times in the history. And, of course, Michael Fassbender's David was in both Prometheus and in Alien Covenant. But Ian Holm, who was the big reveal, the big villain besides the xenomorph in Alien, that was one of the biggest twists in the entire movie is when we find out that he's not only an android, but he is working for the corporation. He don't give a fuck about the crew of the Nostromo. He just wants to save this creature. So that becomes a huge plot point in that movie. We talked about that at length in our original Alien review. But that never came back up again. Ian Holm acted for many years. He was in The Fifth Element, great movie. He was in The Fifth Element. He just continued to act, but never reappeared in the Alien universe, and that kind of bugged Fede and Ridley Scott. So they went to Ian Holm's family, and they said, "Look, here's what we're thinking. We're not, it's not done yet. We're not shooting, and we're just telling you after the fact. How do you feel about this?" And Ian Holm's family told them that towards the last year and a half, 2 years of his life, he felt a little ostracized from Hollywood because he stopped getting offers, stopped getting roles, stopped being able to work. And he was kind of bummed about that. He was kind of sad about that before he died. And his family, I don't know if it was his wife or his kids or who told him this, but they said his family told them if they had come to him with this idea to return for an Alien franchise, he would have absolutely loved it. And he would have jumped at the chance to return for another Alien movie. That's what clinched it for me. Now, did the look succeed? That still is one of the biggest problems I had because there was an actor who played the part and they digitally put Ian Holm's face on the actor, and of course there's CGI, and it didn't look great, Patrick. It really didn't. That's probably one of the parts of the movie that probably looked, I won't say the worst, but it was not great. I think less would have been more with the Ian Holm return as Rook, because they had to digitally, because again, Ian Holm passed away several years ago. So I don't bump up against it nearly as much now, knowing that his family not only knew about it, but actually said he would have loved to have come back. He would have jumped at the chance to star in another Alien film. I was like, oh, that kind of warms my heart because that just, he was such a great actor. I loved Ian Holm. That part one. Part two of that, though, the other side is if you're going to do it, do it right. And I think the look was a little off here.
It's so interesting to me because Disney is without a doubt the most powerful company in Hollywood. They literally just they wield so much power. They have so many resources. And this isn't the first time they've done this. They resurrected a young Luke Skywalker in that episode of Mandalorian or Boba Fett or whatever it was. And I was like, why does this look terrible? Like, it just doesn't look right. And that first viewing on Thursday night or Thursday day, I went to the very first showing that was possible. I looked at that and I went, oh no, that is wrong. That is not right. The second viewing, I had the jarring image had moved on because I knew it was coming. And when I started to really pick that apart, I realized the mouth was the offender. The mouth was a great offender. Everything else actually looked really good. And they play with shadow. And that's another thing too. I think the more in the dark they would have kept him, the better. But at some point he's actually an integral part to the story. You have to start showing him. The mouth was the offender. That's where it just falls completely apart. And my eyes were just right at the mouth. But when on the second viewing, as I kind of sat back and watched it a little bit better, everything else actually looked pretty good. And I was actually talking with Justin Powell, one of our favorite directors, and he had just seen it, and he goes, yeah, he goes, that mouth was just unexcusable. He goes, but small price to pay for a great movie. And I went, well, there you go. There's a director I respect, and he's right. Small price to pay for a great movie. And honestly, small price to pay for what turned into a great character. Because the night before, I did watch Alien. And again, you just feel the fact that Ash was the villain of Alien. The alien is just loose. The tiger went tiger, okay? Ash was the villain. He was there to make the crew expendable. He just needed to get the thing. So when I saw him come back up in this and his storyline progresses, you realize that this model, this Ash or this Rook, this model is essentially a intelligence spy. It's hyper intelligent. Obviously, it has a background in science, so it's there to synthesize things. It's there to actually work with the material, but don't get it twisted. It is 100% a covert spy, a deadly spy that works for Weyland-Yutani. So it creates this new level of stakes for these characters. Now, we mentioned earlier that Andy is sort of a broken down, kind of reconfigured, repurposed android. He's got tics, he's got stutters. He's not quite what he used to be. Well, on the ship, Rain thinks real quick, oh, this android's down on the ground. Let me just take his chip and put it into Andy so Andy can maybe get some of these clearances that we can't get through because they're panicking. And all of a sudden, Andy is now melded with Rook. And Rook, being one of these covert spies, being one of these very dangerous droids, starts to kind of glamour Andy. And he's like, your job, because you have now my programming, my directives, your job is company first. And what we need is specimens. So that's what you need to do. And it creates a whole new level of stakes. And once again, that version of droid becomes a villain in this movie. And so, yes, it's very jarring when you first see it. And if you haven't seen it yet and you don't give a fuck about spoilers, I'm just bracing you now. It's going to be so jarring to see that mouth moving and you're like, whoa, that doesn't look right. But the story itself works out very well for the story of Alien Romulus.
And the other thing I kind of bumped up against, because originally I was like, why bring back this guy? He passed away several years ago. There's so many other options you could have used. Now, I do understand that what we've come to learn about the Alien universe is the androids are all the same models. So there's more Bishops out there, there's more Andys out there, and of course there would be more Ashes out there. He's a science officer, and they say that very specifically. Rook is a science officer. Ash was a science officer. So this is a science officer model. So I understand why you use Ash. I was also at the beginning when I saw it the first time, and I read a review, and I agreed at the time. It said, when you show us Ash, we immediately know he's not to be trusted because we learned from Alien, don't trust this fucking guy. And he's like, I think it would have been a little bit better if you put in, Bishop or another character, because then is he good? Is he bad? Is he trustworthy? I was like, yeah, that would have been kind of nice, because immediately when Ash shows up, I'm like, oh shit, here we go. This guy's just, evil incarnate. But then upon a second viewing, I was like, you know what? The reason I actually like it is we know something the characters don't know. The characters have no idea whether they can trust him. At the beginning, they think they can. They don't learn till way down the line that he doesn't give a fuck whether they survive or not. He is just there for the good of the company. So I was kind of like, you know what? That's like us knowing something that they don't know. And that happens a lot in movies. That's actually a great way to subvert expectation. We know something they don't know. And so, yeah, in a way, I was kind of, it's like when you know who the killer is, but the character in a movie doesn't know who the killer is. You're like, run! You're with the killer! Get the fuck away! They don't know that, though. That's just in our fight or flight mechanism to say, get away from them. So when I watched it the second time, I was like, I understand, and I kind of get what you're saying. But in a way, I'm kind of like this, because I know not to trust Ash, or Rook in this case. I know he's an evil, nefarious motherfucker. They don't know that. So they don't know whether or not they can trust him. They have to learn that for themselves. So, yeah, I'm kind of glad they played it that way. Again, the mouth, it was not good. Other things like fan service moments, I think the biggest one, the most egregious fan service moment, which it is it is literally sigh-worthy. I did it twice now where I was like, please just, I went to the second viewing, I was like, maybe they edited it out and it's not there the second time. So there's a moment where they're in an elevator trying to escape, and they're dealing with gravity, where they turn off the gravity to use it to their advantage, and then they turn the gravity back on so the elevator will work, because pretty ingeniously, an elevator can't exactly go up and down when there's zero gravity. I was like, oh, that's actually, I didn't even really think about that. What a great way to do it. What a great science moment. They have the gravity off and gravity back on. At one point, an alien has a hold of Rain, and Andy manages to help rescue her, and he gets down the bottom of this elevator shaft, and he traps a xenomorph, and he blasts it with a machine, with a rifle, which is the rifle from Aliens. It's the same
the
kind
pulse
of
rifle, yeah.
Pulse rifle, yeah. Different version, but same kind of weapon. And he kills it, and he goes, oh, God. He goes, get away from her, you bitch. And the first night, it's the line, of course, from Aliens when Ripley says that to the Queen when she's trying to save Newt. My first night audience, everyone in the theater went, ugh. And then today when I saw it, everyone laughed and thought it was funny when he does it, because he kind of stutters it out. He's like, get away from her, you bitch. It was so cringy, and I was, both times, like I said, I literally sat in the theater today. It's like, maybe they edited it out. Maybe they heard us all groan and they're just going to edit it out for the same. It is the worst version of fan service, because that happens 37 years from now. You wouldn't just say this. It's just, I know why they're doing it. They're trying to give you some because again, what they didn't do was fuck up the mythology. There's a version, as we all feared, that, this was, I'd heard, actually, let me tell you the spoiler. When I saw Kevin Smith speak in person a couple weeks ago in Cincinnati, in my hometown, he was talking about, somebody had asked him about franchises, and he talked about Alien Romulus, and I was like, he mentioned this during the show, and I was like, dude, if you're right, I'm going to be so pissed at Kevin Smith, he just ruined this movie for me. He had heard that Alien Romulus was about Ripley's daughter going to look for her in space. We know from Aliens that Ripley's daughter died on Earth while she was gone for 57 years. And that's one of the they actually kind of erased that from the plot, because you see it in Aliens and in the director's cut, where they kind of explore it a little bit more, where Paul Reiser's character comes in and tells her more about her daughter after she died. But Kevin Smith's like, I heard Romulus is about Ripley's daughter going to look for it. And I was like, oh, please, God, no. Please just do not do this. Do not make it Ripley's fucking daughter. Oh, Jesus Christ. Thankfully, that's not the case. So, while they didn't fuck with the mythology, they didn't fuck with the story, Sergeant Apone didn't come storming in, Hicks didn't show up, Kane wasn't somehow still fucking alive, none of that. I understand why you stick it and get away from her, you bitch, but Jesus Christ, it was so cheesy.
And I'm right there with you. It was a very cheesy. I groaned at it. I didn't groan audibly, but internally I groaned in my heart. Both crowds I saw with liked it, clapped and cheered. They actually loved it. You know, it was the kind of fan service that was clearly working where I was. I will say this about it. They set it up in the movie because there's obviously a very, very big tension between Bjorn and Andy. And Bjorn at one point makes it a point to call Andy a bitch. And this is actually what the scene you're describing is the xenomorph finale. It is how he saves Rain from being killed from that electronic, you know, headed xenomorph. It's the one that was after them, and he manages to get rid of it. And in that moment, I think he's going, "What do you say to something you really hate? You call it a bitch because that's what Bjorn did to me. So I'm doing that to this thing." They set it up. I get it. I understand. They crossed their T's. They dotted their I's. It was still cringe worthy. For me, it was. I was like, we don't need that. And I was almost like, oh, please don't say bitch. Just say get away from her. And then just I can live with that. Don't do the bitch part. They did the bitch part. And I was just like, okay, that's fine. Not for me. For a lot of people, it worked. For me, it did not work.
I think a lot of casual audiences cheered when that happened. Me personally, I was just like, this is so cheesy. God, it was bad. But again, that's me. That's just me personally. Like I said, it's one line. It's a throwaway. And I would much rather have "get away from her, you bitch" than Sergeant Apone comes in chomping a cigar saying, "What's going on, sweethearts?" I'm fine. If that's the alternative, then I'll take "get away from her, you bitch." So yeah, that was pretty good. Patrick, should we talk about the ending? And I want you to explain the ending and then let me react to it, because I've already said earlier in the show, this was and remains the one thing I really bump up against in this movie. This is my biggest criticism of Alien Romulus. So do you want to tell the ending and then I'll kind of react to what we're talking about here?
Sure. In keeping with tradition with Alien and Aliens, because again, this is the movie that bridges the gap, you get a false ending, false victory. It happens in Alien, it happens in Aliens, where you think you got everything figured out, and no, you don't. So we just explained that ending, right? We just killed the xenomorph that's after us. We're good. They get on their escape pod. They've got their fucking cryopods. They've got their fuel. It's her and Andy. Yeah, all her friends got annihilated, but they got away, and they're gonna find a way to their new home. They did it. Well, that's not how this works. That's not how the Alien franchise works. There's always what Ridley called the fourth act, which is now you're going to have to do one more thing. And this is common in all the screenwriting. It's a false victory. Well, they had their friend Kay, who, as we explained, is pregnant. They also had, and this is something we completely glossed over, in this space station. From the alien, they have synthesized what they call compound Z01. It looks awfully familiar, Damon. If you saw a little movie called Prometheus, there's a black goop that can basically do anything. They synthesized it from the xenomorph. They have compound Z01. They make reference to Wayland and the SS Prometheus. They say, you know, this is what is going to solve deep space living for humans, which are really fragile. Compound Z01 will make humans stronger, better, faster, so they can work in space for Weyland-Yutani. That's ultimately what they want. So they have Compound Z01. There's your big fan service to all the Prometheus heads. And they're out there. They exist. Well, Kay is mortally wounded from all of this hell, and she injects herself with Compound Z01. And that doesn't go well, because truth be told, Weyland-Yutani, again, doesn't know what they're fucking with. Compound Z01 can actually have terrible, terrible side effects. It turns her pregnant belly into the home of what I have called, this is not an official name, this new type of morph, a humanomorph. This baby grows to huge size. It comes in an acid coated, like egg sac, not too dissimilar to the egg sacs the facehuggers are in, and it almost rapidly births about a 12-foot tall hybrid of a human and an engineer, because that goop, compound Z01, is basically engineer sauce. And if you're a Prometheus head, if you're a Covenant head, you know all about engineers. And Rain has to face down this humanomorph, this I would say it's about 12, 13 foot tall, basically has the head of an engineer and the body of like something that lives between a neomorph, an alien, and something else entirely. It is a whole new morph to deal with. Rain heroically does what any good heroine in an Alien franchise does. She fights it to the bitter end, and she ejects it out into space, and they finally get away. That is the ending, Damon. But that humanomorph, that is a new wrinkle. That is an entirely new wrinkle. And I think it nearly caused Damon Martin to have an aneurysm.
Let me just say two very simple words. And I think we kind of together through text messages came up with a name for the new morph. I think I called it something, you called it something. I think together we created the name. My two simple words are this: fuck the humanomorph, or excuse me, fuck the humanomorph. That's my biggest problem. And listen, I read interviews and I saw interviews with Fede Alvarez talking spoilers, and he said that it was actually his homage to the engineers in Prometheus. And there's a lot of Prometheus references in the latter parts of this movie, which were kind of surprising. Because when they show, and Rook explains that they extracted this DNA from the xenomorphs, and you see it in like the cylinder, and I was like, I swear to God, if a space snake pops out here, I'm quitting. It didn't happen. But they show the vase or whatever you want to call it, where the thing came from, and they're like, we extracted this goop, and it's like it's the element that gives the xenomorphs the ability to live and survive through anything. They could be out in the middle of fucking space for 20 years, get unfrozen, and they're just fucking fine. So we want to adapt that into humans. We want to make humans strong. And he says, this is what Mr. Wayland this is what he was after, was immortality. Now that, I appreciate that callback, because that's what we learned Prometheus was all about, was him trying to live on beyond his age, because he was already like 90 and fucking frail and dying. He wanted to live longer, and so that was the whole purpose. So that I understand. And of course you understand that, it's going to go wrong when you put this shit in your body, because it's gone wrong for every single person who's ever touched this shit. But then birthing the humanomorph, it's just this giant, tall, gangly looking engineer xenomorph creature. It reminded me way too much of the weird human crossover xenomorph from Alien Resurrection. Now, I know Fede Alvarez has said he meant it more for the engineer side, but he said when he went to the premiere, his son was like, hey, Alien Resurrection. And his dad was like, well, shit, I guess it kind of does look like that, doesn't it? And so Fede said he didn't really do that on purpose. And he said his son saw it, and he's like, oh, shit, I guess it kind of does look like that. As soon as I saw it, I was like, fuck this thing. Like, seriously? Because here's my thing, and we learned this through Prometheus and Covenant. When we watched Covenant a second or third time, whatever it was for us, and we said by the end of that movie, we actually enjoyed it because it became a proper Alien movie, because they just stopped fucking around and drilled it down to David and the xenomorph. And then the humans got stuck in the middle of these two things. That's all we wanted, the xenomorphs. And that was the people who hated Prometheus, myself included, were just like, get me to the fucking xenomorph. Like, just, give me all the other stuff, that's fine. Engineers, creation of humanity, whatever. The whole point of the Alien is to get to the xenomorph. You didn't want to give me that. And Ridley Scott openly said, I didn't want to give you that. But I'm like, give me that. Alien Covenant kind of, they kind of retconned it a little bit and got us to the xenomorph. We got xenomorphs out the ass in Romulus. Great. There's a great scene, very much 100% paid homage to Aliens, where they're crawling on the ceilings, just like that great scene in Aliens when they realize that they're coming through the air ducts. All that's brilliant. But the humanomorph, whatever you want to call it, I was just like, why? Why? I understand she was pregnant. I get all that. But just give me just give me the xenomorph. Stop fucking with the mythology. Stop fucking with these different. I get it when it's like when the xenomorph, when the facehugger attached herself to a dog in Alien 3. The xenomorph that came out of it was a little more animalistic. It was on all fours. It was very it was almost like it was an animal. It was a predator in that way. It was faster, more nimble, but we understood it came from a dog, so it was slightly different. The alien that was inside Ripley was a queen. Again, slightly different. Just give me that. Give me some versions. I don't need this fucking engineer-morph or a humanimorph or fucking alien resurrection morph. Just give me the fucking xenomorph. Give me a big xenomorph. Give me a fucked up looking xenomorph. This did not work for me. It didn't work for me the first time. It didn't work for me the second time. The actual ending of her realizing that she can't beat this thing, but she saw the egg sac that it came out of was full of acid, so she kicks it over. It burns a hole in the cargo bay of their ship, so it sucks it out through the cargo bay. And she's attached to a like a gimbal thing where she's attached to a wire, so she can get saved. So it pulls everything out of there, but she's able to pull herself back into the ship. It blows the humanimorph out again. Very much like Alien, very much like Aliens. Apparently blowing it out of an airlock is just the universal way to get rid of these things. That's all fine. So like I said, the actual ending is Rain fuels up the fuel cells. She starts to repair Andy. She puts him in one of the cryo chambers. She says, I'm going to fix you. And we learn, which is one of the saddest parts of the movie, we learn that because this isn't a Weyland-Yutani installation, they don't allow androids. Like, you can't have them on this planet. So one of the saddest parts of the movie is Bjorn being a dick telling Andy, you're not coming with us. Like, you were here just to open the doors. Once we get going to Varga, you're fucked. You're not going with us. And at one point, Rain, like with tears in her eyes, says, I just didn't have the heart to tell him. But he's ultimately an android. He doesn't have emotions. He's just like, hey, if it's best for Rain, that's my directive. It's best for Rain. But she's like, fuck all that. You're coming with me. She puts him in the pod. She gets herself in the pod, and she's like, very alien. She's like, this is Rain Carradine. I'm the last survivor of the cargo ship, Kurgaro, or I can't remember what it's called. And we're on our 9-year journey to Yavaga. And that's how it ends. That's fine. I was cool with that. I was cool with them saving Andy, all that. But fuck this humanimorph.
So there's a few reasons why I don't say fuck this humanimorph. One, another thing about like the CG with Rook earlier, it seemed so CG to me the first time I saw it, and then when the second viewing, I was like, oh, this is like 99% practical. Like, he was in the room. There was one scene at the very end where he's like chomping at her face mask and he's trying to get away. That's clearly CG. I don't think you can get around that. So that part, that's one thing where I'm like, okay, like that bothered me the first time, and on the second viewing, I realized it was actually pretty practical. But thematically, Damon, this is the most relevant thing to this movie. And I said this when we were texting about it. I go, this movie has to set itself apart somehow. It can't just play the hits. Yes, we love the hits they played. It was great. How do you be your thing? Well, it all starts at the beginning, right? These kids are on this planet. Everyone around them is dying from just living in essentially hell. But the company has a fix. It's called Compound Z01, right? They know all these humans are fragile. They're disease-ridden from living in close quarters and not getting sunlight and all this stuff. This Compound Z01, that's going to fix it. But of course, corporate greed, no sense of humanity, no sense of foresight. Do they say that this is an irresponsible thing to do? Well, you see when she injects herself with it and it gets into her baby, and this baby grows into this humanimorph. This humanimorph, the first thing it does is it sucks the life out of its own mother. That's the first thing it does. It sucks the life out of the only humanity the humanity that birthed it. It is the byproduct of Weyland-Yutani's absolute just evil intentions and its lack of humanity as a corporation and what it has done to this particular group. It's why they were so desperate to get off this planet. It's why they risked their lives to get off this planet. They had to face what that company is doing to them in some way, shape, or form. Otherwise, they're just doing a regular Alien movie, and actually, I would have been fine if it ended the way it ended. But it did need that final thing. It couldn't have just ended there in the elevator shaft. That wasn't really enough. It needed the final thing, because that's what Alien and Aliens did, and this movie lives in that universe. And so what they did is they faced down the real horror, which is what this company could turn people into. That was their plan. Their plan was to turn them into those things. And so Rain faces one of those down and, blows it out of the airlock, as any good heroine from Aliens will do. She blows it out of the airlock, but it's thematically very relevant to this. And then, another aside, the canon of the Alien series, which is far more vast. It goes into video games. It goes into novelizations. I think you even picked one of them up over time. We have always teased the idea that the xenomorph compound Z01, could birth things that are beyond xenomorphs. And we finally got a taste of what that looked like. Not everybody has to like that, but we finally got it in a movie. And it was to me, especially this in the second viewing, I saw the horror of it. I saw the Fede Alvarez stamp on it. It was scary. It was nasty. It was gross. It was disturbing. And it had a lot of commentary in it. It was about the greed of this company and the horror that they actually impose on people. So I don't have a problem with it. That's why I said, I think we texted about it. I go, now that I've seen it, the ending bothers me even less. It didn't bother me when I first saw it, but now I could see the thematic machinations of it all. And yes, it wasn't a classic xenomorph, but this world, the world of Alien offers so much more than that. And we've never really gotten to it. This is the first movie that shows you it can be other things, and those other things can be just as terrifying. Of course, I love the xenomorphs, and of course, the xenomorphs are going to be my number one. The queen is going to be great. There's the king. There's all these different things you can play with in the Alien world with xenomorphs, but there needs to be other horrors too. And this was Fede Alvarez's chance to show that.
And I'll still say I totally disagree, because ultimately, what we've learned over time and the evolution of these creatures is that while they do evolve and they change, ultimately they are still xenomorphs. There's a queen xenomorph, there's the snake-looking xenomorphs, there's the dog-looking xenomorphs. There's a lot of different versions, but they ultimately all are xenomorphs. You said king xenomorph. I think that would have been a cool twist. Have it come out and be a male version of the queen, just like a big-ass, fucking terrifying-looking xenomorph that grows out of because it had that embryonic fluid from a human baby to feed on instead of just one. It had two humans to feed on. It fed on its mother, and it fed on the human baby, and it becomes the king. Or, as I said, maybe it's the queen, because when we get to Aliens, we know there is a queen, but we've never seen a queen before then. Maybe this is the birth of a queen. Maybe this is where we just see another version of a queen come out of there. I don't know. The human thing just didn't work for me, and it just took me totally out of what was otherwise a pretty brilliant film. And, I understood why he did it. He was, again, paying homage to Prometheus, going back to the engineers and all that, but it just didn't work for me. Again, give me a mutant-looking one. Give me a crazy fucking giant xenomorph. Give me a weird-looking king xenomorph. Give me a queen xenomorph. Give me a xenomorph. This weird humanoid thing looked nothing like a xenomorph, and also the CG was not great on it either. It looked really weird, and for what was otherwise a pretty perfect film, this really just did not land for me. And it kind of reminded me, because I know you talked about the evolution, and I understand this is a different universe. And Alien and Aliens are what I consider to be my two favorite films, but we have to acknowledge there's far beyond these two films, and the canon goes deeper than that, just like with the creature in Alien 3. It's not a typical xenomorph, but it's still a xenomorph. Not that dissimilar from other xenomorphs. It's when you get into Prometheus and Alien Resurrection when you get the really fucked up different versions of a xenomorph. But what I was thinking about when I got home and I got so frustrated with that particular thing was, we just talked about A Quiet Place Day One a couple months ago, and we were both blown away by how much we liked it. And we said that neither one of us were super excited about it because we're like, there's only so much you can do with sound-seeking creatures in this family. If it's just sound-seeking creatures just hunting humans, you better do something different because this just isn't going to work over and over and over again. What did they do? Character development and the story. We cared so much about that while the creatures mattered, they were almost incidental to the better story of what was going on around us because the characters, Lupita Nyong'o and Joseph Quinn and everything else, the world building they did in that film. And that's what got me back to Aliens. I'm like, listen, I understand this black goop can create all kinds of funky shit. I get it. But we are now 20 years removed from Alien. We are 37 years removed from Aliens. Just give me a different xenomorph. Give me a fucked up xenomorph. Give me a queen xenomorph. Give me a king xenomorph. Just introduce, because what we've also learned in the mythology now is that these creatures don't die. So this xenomorph, this humanoid looking motherfucker, gets punched out the bottom of this cargo bay and it's out in space. 37 years later, did they never go back and find it? Did they never go back and look for it? Did they never try to go find traces of what happened here? Because we one thing I bumped up against when I first saw this movie was, and I got an answer to me, and it fixed on a second viewing. We learned that this space station rescued that hunk in space and found the xenomorph 170 days ago. That's a little less than 6 months. And in this 6 month span, they did all this experimentation. They extracted DNA, but the xenomorph was still alive. And mayhem fucking hit. And sometime during this 6 month span, the entire crew of the Remus and the Romulus got fucking wiped out. And that's where they're basically hanging around outside of the Jackson Mine planet. And I was like, if this is such an important space station, why is it just dangling out in space somewhere, just left to rot? And why is Weyland-Yutani, this megalomaniacal corporation, not coming to retrieve their shit? And then watching it a second time, they actually say when they rescue the compound Z01, Rook tells them, once you get to the ship, I'll release the ship so you guys can leave, and I'll send a message back to the corporation. They'll get it in 6 months, and they'll be very thankful for your service to the corporation. So what we've come to learn is it takes 6 months just for the communications to reach fucking Weyland-Yutani. So we have to imagine, okay, they've had it for 170 days. Some point in that 4 or 5 month span, that's when shit hit the fan. I'm sure they sent a message back saying, we're fucked, send help. But the message probably hasn't even gotten there yet. So that's why these kids are able to go on board and get in the ship and explore, because Weyland-Yutani either A, hasn't even found out about it, or they're just now on their way out here and it's going to take them 6 months or 9 months or however long the fucking travel is to actually get here. So I was like, why would you just leave this super important space station just dangling out in the middle of nowhere? That's why, because it takes fucking years to get there. So that I stopped bumping up against. But again, you're telling me that they went through all this search and rescue and everything to find the one xenomorph that got punched out of the Nostromo. You're telling me that I guess maybe they're saying it got sucked down into the rings and it got destroyed maybe. I don't know. It just... Don't overcomplicate it, Patrick. Just give me the fucking xenomorph. You can still have a really cool battle. You can still have a really cool xenomorph. I didn't need that. That just, again, it's a personal preference. I'm sure there's going to be people who say I loved it. But for me, every time, just like A Quiet Place, I don't need a fucking, suddenly there's going to be a creature that can hear. Or like we talked about, like with A Quiet Place, not to rehash that, when we said, we don't necessarily need to know where they came from, and we don't need like this plot of like, let's go to their home planet and fuck them up. Or don't turn it into Independence Day. We don't need Quiet Place to turn it into Independence Day. In this case, just give me the xenomorph. I like the xenomorph. We all like the xenomorph. We haven't had a proper alien film with fucking xenomorphs in like 20 some odd, 30 some odd years. Why did you need to do that? Just give me the xenomorphs. That's all. That is honestly my only really big gripe with this movie, is that element. If you just gave me the xenomorph, I would have been fine.
You seem to be in the camp where you just say, like, that's the thing I like about Aliens is the xenomorphs. but the larger canon suggests there's so much more to be done. So it's Damon Martin is like, hey, I'm a xenomorph only guy. If you're gonna do movies that don't include xenomorphs, I'm not interested. That's fair. I'm not gonna tell you not to, but canonically, or however the hell you say that, this is an important new wrinkle that as we've just kind of been waiting for. If you really follow the big lore, especially what love them or hate them, Prometheus and Covenant are very important to the canon now, and they have a lot of fans. So adding in that element that it's like, well, this can exist as well. This is a thing that can exist as well. Now, truth be told, the way this movie ends, it's very likely that the space station is going to be completely wrecked. It's going to be bits against these ice rings, and very likely that Humanimorph is also going to be smashed to bits against these ice rings. They put that station there for a reason. They put it there because this is a dangerous product. They cannot have it near anything important. That's why they put it by the Jackson mining hole. They were like, yeah, this is a dog shit little outpost. We can put it by that because if things go wrong there, no big deal. So I do think what Fetty did there was he covered his tracks by saying all this gets smashed against the rocks. You may find pieces of it, and they certainly will. In about 6 months' time, they'll know what's happened, and they will be coming to look for any possible piece. That is Weyland-Yutani. They will do that. It just adds the new wrinkle. Maybe Damon's not going to like that wrinkle. I still think that almost every Alien movie that's coming, and I know more are coming, are going to stay with the xenomorphs. But now you can add Humanimorphs into all of that. And some of us are going to be okay with that.
And the last thing I'll say on this, the only thing that scares me about that is because when we get to Aliens, when Ripley tells them about what happened on the ship, they don't believe her. They're just like, yeah, this is horse shit. Like, we've had people living on LV-426 for years. You're out of your mind. And it's Paul Reiser. Why am I forgetting why am I forgetting his name? Paul Reiser's character.
Burke.
Burke, thank you. It's Burke who reaches out to them and say, hey, there's this derelict spacecraft out there. You guys should go explore and see what's out there. Didn't warn them, didn't say it was in there. Just, hey, you guys should go check this out. And it was Newt's father in the deleted scenes that you see in the director's cut, who is the first explorer to go out there, and he comes back with a facehugger on his face. And then all hell breaks loose on LV-426. So I know Weyland-Yutani is a big corporation. I know they're evil and nefarious and all this kind of stuff, but I'm not saying they wouldn't have gaslit Ripley when she comes back and tells them the story, but the fact that they just seem so oblivious, and even Burke as the company man doesn't, like, if they knew about all this on the Jackson's mind, on the Romulus and Remus, even if because again, they had to send information back that just didn't get to Weyland-Yutani for months. But they had to know about some of this. You know what I mean? Because Rook actually calls them the xenomorph. He calls it the xenomorph. They had already named the creature. And when Ripley tells them about it, she says xenomorph. Like they say, this xenomorph creature. So they know the name of it. But I just don't want them to get too deep into that, because you're kind of erasing what happens in Aliens a little bit, because even if they're gaslighting Ripley, Burke, who is deeply embedded with Weyland-Yutani, he doesn't seem to know that. He just says, hey, let's see what's out there. And at that point, they're not interested in, let's create the fucking, the human genome that's going to allow humans to survive. They're like, we need to weaponize these fucking things. Because when he goes out there, he says, you know how much these specimens would be worth to the weapons division? And Ripley's like, fuck you.
Yeah.
It just changes it too much, where I understand it could be about both things. It could be about turning it into a weapon and also using the DNA. But I'm just saying, like, they seem so oblivious to what they're dealing with by the time we get to Aliens, that if you dig too deep into mythology back then they would know a lot more. Like, I'm not saying they wouldn't gaslight Ripley. I'm saying they would have sent ships out there to fucking retrieve these things. They wouldn't have sent one group of Colonial Marines, one officer being Burke, and then Ripley to say what's going on out there. They would have had a fucking fleet out there to rescue the eggs, because they know what they got. They know what they've been looking for. So that's what I'm saying. Like, don't go too deep into the whole it evolves and it's a humanimorph and all this shit. Because
I think that's why I call it a new wrinkle, because I think Burke is focused on weapons, and they love the xenomorph as weapons. Compound Z01 is really more about that's like a whole other division of
No, it
Weyland
is.
Yutani.
It is. But I'm
so,
saying they
so
seem
I don't
so,
even
they
think
seem
that
so,
there are things that intersect. Is my point.
I'm just saying they seem so oblivious to it in Aliens that if they know all this shit in 20 years after Alien, they wouldn't know any of this by Alien. It just seems a little. That's again. I think that's where you risk the timeline when you get too deep into this. Like I understand.
I think what happens is they keep fucking with xenomorphs and they keep losing them, and they're like, we've got to get these things. Like, you remember what happened on the Romulus? We lost all those fucking xenomorphs. Like, they probably don't know anything about the humanimorph at all. Like that literally just happened to Rain. She knows the terror of it.
But they have
she doesn't
know
know
about the compound Z01. They have to know about that because
they know about compound Z01, and they'll also look through those logs and go, oh, actually, this was bad news. We're not going to do this on humans yet, based on what we have from the logs, because that was the thing, is that the way station itself. Again, I think the point we're getting at is that Romulus really covers its bases. It really makes sure that every little piece is there. If you did dig too deep, you can get in trouble, but you can do that with pretty much any series. Any series has that problem. They cover their tracks really well in this. They really do. And the humanimorph is truly Rain's experience. No one else knows about this. No one knows this happened. It's not on any log. She didn't log it. She's a kid. She's just like, hey, I'm the lone survivor. Me and my brother, we're headed to Yuvara. See you later, fuckers. They don't know that thing happened at all. And she's going to tell a tall tale about fighting a giant baby that was born 2 seconds ago and is now 12 feet tall and looks like I don't know what. She has no basis of knowledge for Prometheus or anything like that. It's just something that happened to her with no record out there at all. So I think it's just a new wrinkle for the franchise that doesn't interrupt anything from Aliens.
Yeah, I think it would have been fine with the xenomorph, and it doesn't bump too far up against like the research and development part of it. And again, I understand because remember, when Alien happens, they're like, hey, we care about this alien life form. They don't know what it is exactly, or at least we don't fully understand at that point what it is. Again, we have to, there's the possibility of they know about Prometheus, the missing ship, and Alien Covenant. That's what we're imagining in Alien. And basically at that point, Weyland Yutani is just like, save this alien creature at any cost. Fuck the crew, just save this creature. Now, they don't seem to know much about it at that point. And then when they send the crew out 20 years later in Romulus to rescue this, to see what they've got, and they realize what they've got, not only do they have a creature, but it's a fucking creature that can survive the deeps of space for 20 years and still live, then they really start digging into what it is. And that's why Rook says, like, we're realizing Mr. Weyland's lifelong dream of this substance. Again, all that's fine. It's just when they start really digging into mythology, it's just like, well, wouldn't they know a little bit more 37 years from now? Like, when we get to Aliens, wouldn't they have some better clue?
No, because everything, all the actual research is destroyed. They have to start from zero.
But they would have sent the information back. I mean, they would not have
Yeah, they got information, but they don't have material. That's where the chase continues. It's like, yes, I have information, but I don't have DNA. I don't have physical stuff. It's all getting destroyed.
I just have a hard time believing that if all that information gets sent back to Weyland Yutani, and even if they can't retrieve any of it, I'm not even talking about the humanimorph at this point. I'm just saying like the information about the compound Z01, all that, that when they go into Aliens and they're like, hey, we lost contact with the colonists on LV-426. Here's one group of one group of Marines. Here's one stooge from our Weyland Yutani group, and here's one android. Go find out what's going on out there. To me, like, it would have made a lot more sense. They're like, hey, we're going to send a fucking fleet out there and we're going to find out what's going on. Right. It's just, again, it's a little messy is all I'm saying. Like, I think if you get too deep in the woods, that's why I said, like, I understood why they tied it back to Prometheus, but I feel like you get a little too deep in the woods, and by the time 37 years from now, wouldn't they have a little bit more working knowledge of what they're dealing with? I'm just making a point. You're right about the humanimorph. They wouldn't have known about that.
Yeah.
But to me, still, I don't need the humanimorph. Like, it just took me out
Point
of it.
taken,
Because
Damon. You only want xenomorphs.
give me the xenomorph. Give me big xenomorphs. Give me small xenomorphs. Give me any kind of fucking xenomorphs. Just give me xenomorphs. I don't need the fucking human element, is all I'm saying. So there you go. Patrick, we've been debating this for a really long time. I apologize. Let's move on to our next category, our new category, which we named after a great moment in the iconic Nightmare on Elm Street Part 3 for our best performance.
Welcome to prime time, bitch!
Our welcome to primetime bitch best performance. Patrick, who gets that for you in Alien Romulus?
Who gets it for me is a young man by the name of David Johnson, who plays our android Andy. I was not ready for how great this character was going to be. First off, he breaks your heart. In that first act, he is a repurposed android. He's got a lot of problems and stutters, and he's almost childlike. And Rain actually has to take care of him. It kind of backfired. Her dad's plan for someone to take care of her backfired because she's really having to take care of him. He's not in a great way. That the humanity that he can bring across as that character in those moments is touching. It's very touching. And then a new wrinkle appears when he gets up into the space station and he gets a hot injection worth of Weyland-Yutani firmware that actually updates and upgrades his AI. All of a sudden, he's like a new man, and he has a whole new persona about him. He's got a new confidence to him. He's gained his strength back. Now, remember, he's a droid that's meant for mining and for farming, so he has incredible strength. He can stop any of these pneumatic doors that can like basically sever a human. He could stop them with his own two hands. He becomes an incredible asset. But also he is now they've now put Weyland-Yutani directives in his brain, so he becomes a different person. David Johnson is great at playing all of these pieces. And things happen where it's like at some point, he gets zapped, and that creates a short circuit in him, and he changes. So he goes through all these different changes, and I just thought to myself, like, man, this kid is nailing it so well, to the point that I was like, I think Kaylee Spaney probably hates him because he stole the fucking show right from under her. She is supposed to be the star of this movie, but all anybody can talk about is David Johnson, and for very good reason.
So I would love to go in a different direction here because Kaylee Spaney is great. I'm a big fan of her. She was incredible in Civil War. If you haven't seen that movie yet, I loved that movie. That was really well done. I know she also did Priscilla. I haven't seen that, but I've really liked everything I've seen Kaylee Spaney. She was also in what was that show? The murder mystery. Mayor of Easttown. Is it Mayor of Easttown? Is that what it is?
Mayor of Easttown, yeah.
Yeah, that one with Kate Winslet. She was in that very briefly. She had a small part in that. Great actor, by the way. So I want to give her flowers. She's incredible. But the answer is David Johnson. He stole the show. When this was over, I was like, well, here's a guy who's just built a career out of one movie. Like, he's going to get a lot of acting jobs based on this one particular movie. And again, another reason why I was so blown away, which, to their credit, nobody outside of Kaylee Spaney in this movie I'd ever heard of. I never heard of any of these characters. I kind of like that because when you go back to the original Alien, while there was a couple, Tom Skerritt had been in a couple things. This was Sigourney Weaver's first movie. Like, this was kind of an unknown cast. And even when Aliens came out, like at that point, like, yes, Bill Paxton became a household name. Michael Biehn became, more of a household name after Terminator and then going into Aliens. And of course, Sigourney Weaver at that point, she got nominated for an Oscar, but it still wasn't like just a all-star list of actors. It was still a lot of unknowns. I like that they kind of kept that theme going with Alien Romulus, where outside of Kaylee Spaney, I'd never seen any of these people in anything. And so David Johnson killed it. That's the answer. I would love to sit here and say, oh, well, this person or that person, they were all good. I thought the entire cast worked really well. The kid who played Bjorn made me want to punch him numerous times. Yeah. But ultimately, I had to go with David Johnson. He is the best performer. He stole the show.
Fully steals the show. And I'm not gonna say it right here and now, but he might be my favorite droid now. Artificial human. He might be my favorite artificial person. Artificial person. Excuse me.
Yeah.
I don't want to be a prisoner of the moment, but I'm going to watch this movie a lot. I'm like you. I'm going to buy the 4K Steelbook when that shit comes out. That's going to be part of my collection for sure. It's going to take time to know that, but boy, is this a performance for the ages. It's fantastic.
So, with that being said, let's slip into our next category, and I'm going to go first here. Our next category is our MVP, and that is our Ken Foray Banana Hammock MVP Award, named after great character actor Ken Foray from the movie From Beyond, when he jumped down a flight of stairs and into a basement to stop a creature wearing nothing more than a thong bikini. If that's not an MVP performance, I don't know what is. So, Patrick, my MVP, I went way out on left field for this one, but it plays into your point about David Johnson's performance. My MVP for Alien Romulus are two guys who had absolutely nothing to do with this movie.
Interesting.
Walter Hill and David Giler. Why is Walter Hill and David Giler my MVP for Alien Romulus of all things?
I gotta know.
You know why. You know why. Walter Hill and David Giler were the producers on the original Aliens and on the original Alien. And they were the ones who said, we need Ash. We need an android. That's their character. They came up with the idea Ash. They came up with the idea of it being an android. They came up with an idea of it being evil. That's Walter Hill and David Giler's creation. They were the ones who championed this, said, we need this character in Alien. And that was a change that they made to the original script from David, was it, who was the original writer?
Dan O'Bannon, yes.
Dan O'Bannon and Ronald
Suchet.
They're the ones who came on as producers and said, and Walter Hill, we've mentioned him before, incredible director, writer. He's been around forever. He's worked on everything. He's got a hand in so many different stews and chilies in this industry. You know Walter Hill is if you look up his IMDb page. Walter Hill and David Giler, producers, were like, you need to put Ash in here. And that was a change because, there were a lot of changes from the original script of Alien, just like, the original crew was all men. And they're the ones who said, hey, Ripley should be a woman. Like, there's a lot of different tweaks and changes. They're the ones who came up with Ash. They're the ones who came up with Ash being an android, and they're the ones who said Ash should be evil. The reason I give them the MVP for Alien Romulus is because you could argue you will not find a bigger Ripley fan than the guy sitting in this chair right now. I fucking love Ripley. I love Sigourney Weaver. I've contemplated when I have 2 boy dogs right now. When I get a girl dog, there's a good chance I'm going to name that dog Ripley. I love Ripley. That being said, you could argue the strongest character in all of the Alien franchise films have been the androids. Michael Fassbender's David, Ash in Alien, Bishop in Aliens, and now David in Alien Romulus. And that all springs from the DNA created by Walter Hill and David Giler in Ash.
Not terrible picks either, because I believe when they came on, they also changed Ripley to a woman.
They were the ones who did that too, yes.
Yeah, it was always going to be like they kept the names ambiguous on purpose, but they were planning on casting a man until Walter Hill and Giler came in and they said, "What about a woman?" And that changed the game. And it pretty much changed my life because, Ripley is probably one of my favorite characters of all time. So yeah, not a terrible pick. I see where you're going with that. They came up with the idea of an android. And like I said, I do think Andy as an android is one of the finest examples in the entire franchise, if not the best.
Yeah, so that's why I know it's kind of out left field, but I went with that because if you don't get Ash and Alien, you don't get that twist. It's just a different version of that film. Not saying it still couldn't have been great. It could have just been the science officer's a human and he's just a corporate stooge and he just turns on his crew. That's fine. But because of Ash, you get to Bishop. It ends up being an incredible character. Lance Henriksen steals the show, does a great job in Aliens. You get to David being a linchpin, really the linchpin of both Prometheus and Alien Covenant. And I think that kind of creates what we both agree was the best performance and probably our favorite character of Alien Romulus, which was Andy. So yeah, like that's why I say like I'm not saying you couldn't have gotten there. But I guarantee you, James, that Bishop's turn of being actually like a good guy, like an actual good person, that was all predicated on Ash being evil in the original one. Like that was the whole way that James Cameron played him in Aliens was, can we trust him? Ripley fucking hates him. is he trustworthy? Is he just another Ash in a different form? And then we find out Bishop's actually a good dude or a good robot or whatever the fuck you want to call him. He's a good guy. He saved them. He would never hurt them. He is there to save them. You don't get that without Ash's turning alien. And you don't get Ash without Walter Hill and David Giler.
Yeah, fair enough.
What about you, Patrick? Who do you have for best for MVP?
My MVP, of course, goes to director and co-writer Fede Alvarez, who was tasked with, I think, doing something impossible, and that was making not just a passable alien film, but a good one. And you know, the jury is out on whether all of the films after Aliens are good. This is a good movie. This is a good movie. It's a fun, I called it a ride. Like afterwards, I was like, "This is a ride. Go on this ride." And that gave me like feelings of Aliens. Aliens is very much a ride as well. And then there's moments in this movie that are very much a meditation, which is Alien. This was an impossible task, and Fede succeeded on every single level. It's a great story. It looks great. It sounds great. The sound design in this movie is incredible, and Fede has a strong background in music, so the score hits when it needs to hit. Everything about this movie is great. It's great, and it's a great Alien movie, and I cannot sing his praises enough because it's just, I was feeling like there's no way it's gonna be good enough because you're holding it up to incredibly high standards, and Fede was able to make it not just good enough, he made it great.
He did, and he made it his own movie. While this is a great homage in a lot of ways to Alien and Aliens, I love that. And, you know, in Alien 3 and Alien Resurrection, for better or worse, and Prometheus, for better or worse, he does a lot of things like that, but he still makes it his own movie, and I really appreciate that. So, yeah, like, I agree. And again, Fede Alvarez, even though I, you know, not gonna lie, don't like the Humanomorph, don't give me more of that. 3 for 3. I mean, I loved Evil Dead. We fucking, you know, that we've fawned all over that movie before. Don't Breathe is incredible. What a great act of tension building in that very small self-contained horror film. And of course this one. So yeah, great job, Fede Alvarez, man. More of this, more of whatever you want to do. And I hope, you know, it sounds like we're probably going to get a sequel. We're going to get some more Alien in there. I hope he's involved because just like Dan Trachtenberg did with Prey, and they're going to do another Predator movie, and they're like, Dan, you want to come back? Because you really seem to get this world right. Fede, sign up, buddy. Come on, come back.
Yeah. Ridley said something like, he goes, at some point you got to pass the baton to somebody. Somebody's got to pick up the mat and run on the pitch. He goes, we thought Fede was the right guy, and they made the right choice. They really did, because let's be honest, Ridley Scott is in his mid to late 80s now. We probably got another good 10 years with him. I hope we get more. But someone's going to have to be the person who takes this into the future because, like it or not, Disney's going to keep making Alien movies. So somebody's got to look after them. And if it's going to be Fede, I think they picked the perfect guy.
God, I wish we could have gotten one more out of James Cameron. Goddamn fucking Avatar. I wish
he's too busy with Avatar, dude. He
Avatar,
can't do anything else right now.
We're gonna be in Avatar 19. Like, couldn't we got one more Alien movie out of you? Just one? Like, couldn't we just like could we pull like a Halloween 2018? Let's forget kills and ends. But like, couldn't we do that and just pretend Alien 3 never happened and you come back and you give us Hicks and Newton something? Come on, can you come back for one more? But yes, I agree. If it's not gonna be James Cameron, I'm good with Fede Alvarez. Patrick, let's talk about best scare here. This is a horror film. We talked about that very openly. This is definitely a horror film. So what was your favorite scare in Alien Romulus?
This movie, I didn't pick a jump scare, and there's a few of them in this movie, and they are effective, and the crowds were reacting to them. I picked a scene because the level of tension, the dread, as you rightfully pointed out, is very high in this movie. And one of the scenes that I loved was actually the Xenomorph finale, which is there in the zero gravity elevator shaft. The gravity's turning on and turning off, so they're kind of dealing with this unstabilized gravity, and they're in an elevator shaft, a huge one that's probably a good 600-700 feet deep. That was when I got up to pucker factor 20. Like I was just like, this is dangerous. None of this feels safe. The characters seemed to be in such peril in that moment, and you knew that the countdown was happening. Now they're floating through this shaft, and the alien is coming after them, and there's a this elevator that could crush them, and then you know that the gravity is going to come back on, and when it switches on, what is going to happen? Is she going to fall fucking 700 feet and just be pink dust on the floor? What's going to happen? So much tension in that moment. Very like a Spielbergian sort of raising and lowering of your tension during that time, like literally just keeping me on the edge of my seat. It was a really harrowing moment in the movie, and that's why I gave it to my best scare.
It's funny you picked that one because mine was kind of similar in that it wasn't one moment. Although I did, by the way, when Navarro gets attacked by the facehugger, even though they kind of teased that in the trailers, it was a great jump scare. Like when that fucker just comes jumping in and grabs her, it's pretty great. But mine was similar. It was the scene in the cryo chamber when the facehuggers first kind of poop out into existence and they plop into the water. And that's the scene from the trailer where he goes, "There's something in the water. There's something in the fucking water." Xenomorph, the facehuggers are creepy and scary enough as they are, as they skitter and scatter across the floor and everything like that. But when you put them in water, it kind of reminded me of the trash compactor scene from the original Star Wars, where Princess Leia and Han Solo and Luke Skywalker are in this thing and it's contracting. And before it's contracting, they feel something underneath the water and they're like, something's moving in here. And then it grabs Luke and takes him down into the water. It kind of reminded me of that, where like these facehuggers are all in the water, and then one of the best moments is Bjorn gets knocked down, or no, it's Tyler gets knocked down, and this xenomorph, the fucking facehugger, is coming down. It sees him, it's about to jump on him, and it jumps, and Andy grabs it by its fucking tail and chucks it up into the electricity and shocks it to death. Basically, is what we assumed happened. But because Andy's rebooting, she gives him that chip from inside of Rook, and he's rebooting, so it takes him a minute to kind of come back to life like a computer. And it's getting ready to jump on Tyler, and he grabs it by its fucking tail and whips it up into the electricity. But that whole scene is just harrowing because these fucking things are in the water, they're on the walls, and they keep just like plopping out of this jelly-like mold that's unfrozen now, and they just keep going bloop, bloop into the water, and they're everywhere.
It is another Spielbergian moment. I feel like it's a great Spielberg tension moment. And I loved that save, it's like, oh no, it's about to get Tyler. And then right at the moment it doesn't, that hand comes in and Andy saves the day, or at least temporarily, because shit's about to hit the fan anyway, because now these fucking facehuggers are everywhere. But that's one of those scenes where I was just like, this is high level action directing. This is the high level stuff. This is what you expect from the James Camerons, from the Spielbergs, from the Ridley Scotts, and you're getting it from Fede Alvarez. And I was like, damn, this is fucking badass.
100%. Let's talk about best gore, because I'll say there's a fair amount of gore in this movie. I would say weirdly, I don't know that. I'm trying to think, like, there's definitely gore in alien films, but this has definitely got some pretty gory moments. Not overly gory, but definitely some gory moments. So, Patrick, what was best gore for you in Alien Romulus?
I talked about my love of Navarro's chestburster scene, and we talked about that at length. So I'm going to give it that one. But then I will give a shout out to the what I called the corridor of horror. And at one point, they kind of give an homage to Aliens, where they go through a corridor that's clearly been wrapped by a bunch of xenomorphs, and they're just sticking people up in the rafters to eventually get face-hugged and get birthed. Well, all those people in the rafters, they're already bursted. They have already produced what they needed to produce out of these people, and they just run and they're shining their lights up, and you're seeing just blown out chests and mangled faces and all this crazy shit, and it feels like horror. It really does. It blends the horror of Alien and the action of Aliens and the aesthetic of Aliens all in one, and I was just like, God damn, that's a cool fucking scene.
Great scene. For me, and this goes back to a little bit of my criticism of the Humanimorph, because while we've seen a lot of xenomorphs, there's always elements of xenomorphs that I feel like we could get more of. And what is one of everyone's favorite part of the xenomorph is the second mouth inside the head. Now we've seen it, you see it a lot, in shots and stuff, but I don't think they've explored it nearly enough for like how gross and nasty and cool that is. And I think like that's where I said, like, if you give me the xenomorph in that moment, just make it like a really creepy head or whatever, and make it that the bigger head, whatever. But my favorite gore was when the xenomorph captures Tyler. It stabs him through the shoulder with its scorpion's tail, lifts him up into like its little nest where it's got up there, and it comes face to face with him, and it just looks at him, and the xenomorph more or less says, "Fuck you, kid," and its second mouth comes out and just jabs him to the fucking head, and his head bursts open. I loved that scene. It reminded me so much of Aliens when she's in the loader and it's trying to get her with its mouth, except this time there was no getting away. It just chomps right through fucking Tyler's head.
Yeah, great. There's a couple of aftermath scenes too. Like you see one guy who had clearly had that happen to him, and just the whole back of his head is blown out. There's these little touches of gore. They don't go crazy with the gore in this movie, but the touches that are there are done very well.
Yeah, but Tyler definitely met a grisly end. So,
Sorry, Tyler.
Yeah. So next category we call Get a Loader This, which I love the name of that, by the way. This is, a lot of different tools that are used in the Alien franchise, but there were a couple of little technological innovations in Alien Romulus that I fucking loved. And by the way, we did not discuss this beforehand. I was going to bring it up anyways, and then like always, Patrick just read my mind and came up with a category. When I saw this, I was like, dude, get out of my head, because I had literally something I want to talk about here. Now we get a category. So, get a load of this. What is your favorite technological advancement or difference that we find in Alien Romulus? Because it's funny. You had one and I had one. It's perfect.
So, acid blood has been a common theme from the very beginning, and I'd never seen it used this way before. Now, we mentioned earlier that there's a zero gravity machine, or there's a gravity machine that is on the fritz, so the gravity turns on and the gravity turns off. Well, at one point, the gravity is very much on, and they're very much being chased down by a large swarm of xenomorphs, and Rain decides, you know what? What if I shut that gravity off? She shuts it off. She fucking cocks her pulse rifle, and she lays into all these aliens. And instead of their acid going everywhere, the zero gravity turns on, and the acid stays up in the air. It doesn't get around everywhere, because that's the danger of trying to kill these damn things, is that acid will get all over you, or it'll eat right through the hull, and you'll be fucked either way. You'll be fucked two ways. She found a way to unfuck herself. And it was super creative to go, let's just have the acid floating in the air. Now, of course, that creates a problem, and they have to get through that, which is a bunch of floating acid, and they have to get out of there in time before the gravity turns back on. So it creates a nice little bit of tension on top of that, too. It was a nice, new, innovative way to play with acid.
Yeah, the acid was I think Fetty was like, I really like the acid for blood, so I'm going to use that a lot in this movie, and he really does use it a lot in this movie. But I thought that was such a creative way, because one of the coolest parts, again, you always say, if you're going to show it to us, you better use it. The gravity thing was very prevalent early in the film, and then later when they're trying to get through the ship, Andy, when he's still in like his weird kind of Rook, kind of Andy phase, he finds the pulse rifles, and he tosses one to Tyler, tosses one to Rain, and he shows him how to use it, and that's where we learn like that. He's like, this is what the Colonial Marines use, and immediately I was aroused again. He goes like, aliens. But when he hands it to him, he's like, now don't fire them. And Tyler's like, why'd you give us guns? He's like, because I'm hoping it'll just act as a deterrent, kind of like fire does with aliens. When they see fire, they back away. He's like, I'm just using it as a deterrent, because remember, we're on the basement floor here. If we shoot them and that acid hits the floor, it's going to rot through the hull, and we're all fucked, is basically what Andy says. So he's like, just threaten them with it. Don't actually shoot them, because if that acid gets through, the space station is going to suck us through, and we're all dead. So it's a really cool twist. So she had to think of an innovative way to like protect them from the aliens by using the rifle. Acid floating. Cool way to do it. So mine was earlier in the film when so Bjorn and Kay, or Bjorn and Navarro steal the ship because they're like, Navarro's infected. We got to find out she's infected before we take her back to our ship because this could be bad. And Bjorn's like, fuck you guys. Navarro's my girl. We're getting her to, she's fine. Don't worry about the fucking thing that was just attached to her face. We're going to go back to the ship. And she's like, they basically, like, they abandon their friends. They jump on the ship and they're like, we're fucking gone. But then, of course, the xenomorph pops out of Navarro's chest and all fucking mayhem breaks loose. But when the ship backs away, they kind of spin out, big explosion, and they end up on the other side of the station, the Romulus side of the station. They're on the Remus side. Now the ship's on the Romulus side, and they need to go rescue Kay, who is Tyler's sister, and they need to get to their ship so they can get the fuck out of there. But there's this giant corridor between the two segments of the space station, between Remus and Romulus. And there's no other way to get around it. But in this corridor are all the facehuggers. They've escaped the cryo chamber. They've made it through the ship. And now they're all just kind of like lingering in this area where it's nice and warm and dark. And they're just waiting for someone to walk in there so they can fucking attack them. And Andy's like, well, he's like, they don't have eyes. They find you by sound and by heat signature, body temperature. That's how they know you're there. There's no eyes, which makes sense. If you've ever seen a facehugger, it's not got like big eyeballs. So that's how they detect you. And so Rain's like, well, what if we raise the temperature in the room to match our body temperature and we stay quiet? Could we move through the room without them seeing us? And Andy's like, theoretically. So they raise the temperature of the room to 98.6, and they all start walking through very quietly. Now, of course, it all goes to shit because Kay calls her brother, and she's freaking out because what's happening to Navarro, and they hear the noise, and, of course, the facehuggers come, and they all, that's where the line from the trailer comes where Andy goes, run. And they fucking take off because the facehuggers hear them. But that initial tension of being super quiet and the room being heated, they're walking right by the fucking facehuggers, and I'm just like, oh my god, this is gonna go so badly. And I love that. That was just so much tension. It was such a cool twist. Raise your body temperature to the same as the xenomorphs. Worked pretty well. That was pretty good ingenuity.
Yeah, and it was also just like a new way to use the face huggers. They're always chasing you. Well, what about when they're just, I don't want to say docile, but they just kind of don't know you're in the room. But they're completely loose and they could just jump on you any second they want. It was a great way to slow things down and pour over them. It was a new way to look at face huggers, which is great.
Now, Patrick, before we move into one of our final categories, I do have to mention this because Fede Alvarez has said that he didn't want to mess with the mythology. He didn't want to change anything that was going to ruin Alien or Aliens or any of the other films. But he very openly has said that every Alien film, even Resurrection and Alien vs. Predator, influenced this film in some way, shape, or form. And there's great little Easter eggs stuck throughout this movie where you can see little homages. Again, outside of things like Get Away From Me, You Bitch, which is just awful and terrible, and please don't ever let me hear that again, there were a lot of real subtle references. So let's talk real quick about some of our favorite subtle references to the other movies. Now, we already mentioned Compound Z01, and they call it the Prometheus experimentation, obviously paying homage to Prometheus. That was a real nice. And again, even though I didn't like the Humanimorph, that tie back to Prometheus, I was like, okay, now you kind of that's kind of cool. You kind of turn it into like a science experiment. That part I like. What were some other your favorite homages to the other films?
Obviously, the pulse rifle was a big one. A lot of also the set design of the Romulus Remus, which I believe the whole thing is called like the Renaissance or something, and the Romulus and Remus are the wings of it. But the set design felt so much like Alien. Like it just on a grander scale, on a bigger scale. But the thing I love the most, there was this one great thing, is when the kids decide to finally ship off of the Jackson mining colony, they're in their little spaceship and they blast up, straight up into space. It is 100% an homage to Express Elevator to Hell, going down, but instead they're going up. And so in that moment, Bjorn gets out of his little buckles as they're going up, and he does a little trick to shotgun some weed, and because they're going against gravity in a certain way. It was just a little nod to like, yeah, these guys like to have fun too when they're doing huge drops or raises in these ships.
We're on express elevator to hell. Going down.
2.
Except in this case, they're going up. Yeah, it was
They're
great.
going up.
Yeah, also, I mentioned it earlier, but the scene when they're in the ship trying to get through because, again, we have to remember, this was a ship full of people, and when they're on the Remus, they only find Rook, half of Rook, actually. They don't see the people. What they find out is when they get to Romulus, all of the science officers, the Marines, everybody that lived on this station has been hoarded over there to create xenomorphs, just like what happened in Aliens. And so there's that great scene, as I mentioned, where all the xenomorphs are kind of crawling around the corridor up towards them. It's very reminiscent of both the opening scene in Aliens when the Marines first get there and they see all the weird bone structures and everything, and they're like, what the fuck? And they're like, busy little creatures. And then also, and actually, you know what? They actually use that line. Did you catch that line in Alien Romulus? It says busy little creatures. They actually
was it
that.
Rook that said it?
I think it's either Rook or Andy. One of them says busy little creatures.
Yeah. It was, maybe Rook or Andy, yeah.
That was homage, of course, to Aliens as well from Burke's line. But then the second part is also when they're in the air shaft in Aliens and they drop down on him when they're in the science lab. Kind of reminiscent of those two scenes where they're crawling on the ceiling, they're crawling all the. I thought that was totally Aliens. Of course, the pulse rifle you mentioned, that was great. I love that little homage to Aliens as well. But that was sprinkled throughout the movie. But again, outside of Rook, which was, again, totally obvious to be Ash, and then, of course, the get away from your bitch, the other fan servicey, the homage, the Easter eggs, if you will, I thought they were pretty good and not overtly like beating you over the head with it. Like you didn't, like I mentioned the busy little creatures, very small little things like that.
Yeah, tons of little things. Another little thing, Navarro's wearing aviators. She's the pilot. Well, the pilot in Aliens was wearing aviators. You heard her right there in the clip. 3, 2, 1, launch. Like she's wearing the same kind of aviators because she's the pilot in this one. All these little things to just remind you you're in that world. These people have similar clothes. They use similar equipment, all that stuff. It lives in this world. And I mean, it's a real hardcore fan's dream because there's stuff in there that only you're going to get, that only you're going to pick up on because you're a hardcore fan of this stuff. And it weaves itself seamlessly into the story without feeling heavy-handed.
And also, I think, maybe I'm wrong about this, but am I right in thinking that Bjorn's shocker weapon is a little bit of an homage to Alien 3? Because isn't that like the only weapon they have in Alien 3 is they have those little sticks that they use at one point because they don't actually have weapons there. They're like, they have the mining tools, and doesn't one of them have like am I misremembering that?
Yes, no, you're right, because it's where the explosion happens. He drops his little shocker thing and it hits the fuel and it burns the whole thing up.
Yeah. So he had a little shocker thing. So maybe that was a little homage to that as well.
I think so. And I even think I spotted, if I'm not mistaken, a queen facehugger. It was the one facehugger that was about to get Rain, which makes total sense. Why wouldn't the queen alien try to attach itself to Rain? And right in that moment, Andy blows it away. But I was like, if you pause right here, I swear that's a queen alien facehugger.
Yeah. So it was just, again, a couple things I could have, again, I even though, like I said, I've learned to live with the Ash part. I wish the effects were better. But the get away from your bitch, that can't be right. I can't reconcile with that one. But the rest of it was pretty cool. And even here, we're kind of talking about like, hey, was that? So yeah, like,
it's a feast. It's a feast for hardcore Alien fans.
Yeah. Next category, survivalist scorecard. Because we've already said many times, that's why we stopped anytime we review an alien film doing the whole can we survive this horror film, because we've decided when you go up against aliens, when you go up against xenomorphs, chances are you're not making it out of there. That's just not going to happen. These creatures do not leave a lot of survivors. So in a franchise full of characters who failed to survive, how did this young group of up and comers and they're not soldiers, they're not scientists, they're not, they're just kids. They're 20 somethings. I guess like they felt like teenagers, but I guess they're 20 somethings.
Yeah.
How did they stack up?
I think they did a great job. When you consider that they have no training, they weren't preparing for this, they had no idea, they fought for their lives. They kicked ass They really did. I mean, look, they lose bad. I mean, they lose almost everybody. Rain and Andy are the only two left standing in the end, but they fought like hell. And to me, they fought one of the hardest fights in the entire franchise. I think it's much harder than all the other fights. And they did a damn good job. They got out of there. And Rain's final showdown with your favorite scene, the Humanimorph, she goes fucking hardcore. She has to fucking blow the bottom of the whole fucking cargo bay, out, and she has to pull herself back up. I mean, it's pure heroism, and it makes me, and again, I don't know who these people were that couldn't root for these people. It makes me go, I want to see what happens to Rain and Andy next. I really just hope they get to Uvaga and they live out their lives happily. That's what I hope happens. But Weyland Yutani doesn't let shit slide. So the odds of them being pulled back into this universe are very high. And I'm glad at the end of the day that it's Rain and Andy who might come back.
So I'm going to make a point. I think you're going to agree with me. And I'm not. So by the way, for our audience out there, I'm not saying that if you grew up with upper middle class or you were privileged, does that make you weak by any stretch? I'm not saying that. But you and I know we grew up poor and we grew up kind of hard. I didn't grow up in I didn't grow up in like a bad no, I didn't grow up in a great neighborhood, but I didn't grow up in like a horrible neighborhood, but I grew up with nothing. And when you have nothing, you fight for everything you have. That's just ingrained in our nature. I know you were very much the same way growing up. When you have nothing, you fight for the things you have. That's like when I got like one nice thing for Christmas. If you fucked with that nice thing, I will throw down with you. Because I don't have a room full of nice things. I have one nice thing. And I think that played into these characters, that they were living on this grimy, grungy, nasty planet where people, you're basically living there as a death sentence. Like, you're going to live until you're in your 40s, you're going to get black lung, and you're going to die. And they're going to replace you with the next 16-year-old. They know it's a death sentence living here. So they're living hard. So they have a little bit more survival instinct when they get to the ship. They're not soldiers. They're not scientists. They're not trained for this. But they have that. Just like when we're in that thing where he has the shocker, the cattle prod stick, when he fucking bats a couple of the face huggers away. That's just survival instincts. You said that's prime. You're in your prime of human life when you're between like 16 and 25. Your physical stature is better and your faster reflexes, all these kind of things. I thought these kids did a great job. Now, again, as you said, they all get wiped out and it doesn't help them in the end, except for Rain and Andy. But yeah, I thought they did a great job. And I thought that for not having any real skills, they were fighting with what they had, and what they had were survival instincts. And I think that sometimes when you're in a harrowing situation, that kind of matters more.
It does. It really does. And it just gave a whole new look. It just gave a whole new look to this franchise. I'm very impressed with this particular group, and I do hope to see Rain and Andy again sometime.
Absolutely. All right, Patrick, our final category, it is not, is it scary? We're not going to go there. Our final category is it alien? I think we've already answered that question, but Patrick, Alien Romulus, is it alien?
It's a resounding hell yes. I do fancy myself a serious Alien franchise person. I'm very happy. I'm very happy with what I've seen with Alien Romulus. It feels like home. It feels familiar, and yet it's all brand new all at the same time. I can't wait to see it again. I've already seen it twice. This is Alien, 100%.
It is Alien, but I would say even if I didn't think it was, I would defer to the Alien master, and that is Patrick Guerra, because you are an Alien fanatic. That is your favorite franchise. You've now said it probably surpasses Friday the 13th in terms of your passion and fandom.
Oh, I know it does. Just factually it does, yeah.
So, yeah, like, again, like, maybe one day they'll come out with a new Nightmare on Elm Street and Mike Flanagan will direct it or whatever, and you and I will have a chance to review that, and I'm sure at some point you'll defer to me a little bit because I'm the Nightmare fanatic. 100%. I'll defer to you and say 100%. Because you say it's an alien film, it's an alien film. But me personally, yes, I still consider it an alien film. And it fits perfectly in the canon. We're going to do a wrap-up show about the entire franchise where we will rank them. I'm sure a lot of people are like, why don't you rank the movies? We will rank them eventually, just not tonight. But I'll tell you ahead of time. I'll tell you ahead of time. Alien Romulus is going to go closer to the top of the list than the bottom. I can promise you that much based on what I've seen here. So this is an alien film. It's a great alien film. Go see it. As I said, it's got my money twice. It'll probably get it a third time, and it will definitely get my money on 4K and whatever streaming service Hulu already got. But you know what I mean. Like, this is getting all my money. So even though fuck the Humanimorph, everything else in this movie is golden.
I'm a happy boy tonight. I really am. I've been really waiting for this for a long time. I'm glad we chose the Alien franchise to do this year. It really worked out really well. We butted right up to the premiere of Alien Romulus, and we added a new one to the list. We added a new Alien movie to the list, and it's a good one.
It is. All right, folks, that is our episode. We will be back next week. We actually have a lot coming over this next week. So not only are we going to be releasing our Alien Romulus episode, we're also going to have a special episode reviewing a little film coming out called Strange Darling, starring Kyle Gallner and Willa Fitzgerald. I've already seen it. I actually had a chance to interview Willa Fitzgerald and JT Mulner and Giovanni Ribisi, the actor who is now working as a director of photography on this film. Those interviews are going to be up on our YouTube channel, so make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can see my interviews with Willa Fitzgerald and the director of photography for Strange Darling. So we're going to have a spoiler-free review of Strange Darling. Patrick is going to the premiere on Monday, and I have already seen it and interviewed the cast, so we're going to do that. And then, of course, we also have, for better or worse, the Crow remake is coming out in a couple of days, so we're gonna have that. We're gonna have that one coming soon as well. Yeah, stay tuned. Yeah, stay tuned for that. I don't know if that's going to be nearly as friendly as the Alien review, but we'll see. As always, we appreciate everyone tuning in the show. Make sure you check us on all your favorite podcast platforms: Apple Podcasts, Spotify. And as I said, check out the YouTube channel. That's the only place you're going to find these interviews with Willa Fitzgerald and the directors from Strange Darling. I've seen it. I'm not going to say anything about it going cold, but I'll say this just to tease it. This is right now one of my favorite 5 films of the year. So,
well, there you go. Shit.
Yeah. So we'll have that coming this week, and of course we'll also have The Crow. I don't know if that will end up in my top 5 films of the year. You got questions, comments, movies you'd like us to review, hit us up on anytime on social media. Just search Rewind of the Living Dead on X/Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram, or send us emails at rotlivingdead@gmail.com. That's rotlivingdead@gmail.com. Or you can also find us on our own personal social media channels. I am at Damon Martin, and you are?
At Director Patrick.
And a big thank you, as always, for everyone that tunes into the show. We will be back next week with another edition of Rewind of the Living Dead. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you then.
Peace.